Good evening, and welcome to the November 6th Issaquah City Council Budget Deliberation Session. I want to thank my fellow council members. Councilmember Goodman will be here shortly. With that, we will dive in. As we discussed last week, we will continue through the list of proposed additions, subtractions, modifications. We will discuss each item and give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. When we get to the end, we will come back around to the subject of utility tax. We'll take the temperature of the body on utility tax. Then we'll get a sense of where we are on ending fund balance, and we will entertain any potential further additions, subtractions, either revisiting of existings or whatnot. And when we reach a point where no one has any further potential additions or subtractions, ladies and gentlemen, we will be done. So with that, let us dive in. So we have a new spreadsheet. Why does this look different than the one that was in the email to me? Okay. There are two.
And can I explain why they look different?
Please do.
So, sorry to interject. So the spreadsheet on the screen right now is one that I consolidated to the salient points. I hid some columns so that it would fit on one screen for when we go through the details tonight.
Excellent. Is this a spreadsheet that you've sent to us?
It was. I sent it last week, I believe, on... I mean, I could also just send this to you all again in its current form. Would you like me to do that right now?
Well, I'm just, okay, because I'm looking at the one you sent on the 30th, and it doesn't look like the one you sent on the 30th. Yeah, no, I mean, it's got stuff grayed out that isn't great, that wasn't grayed out on the 30th.
Yeah, go to the second tab on the spreadsheet. The first tab has nothing grayed out.
That would be, I bet you, the explanation.
Do you still want me to send out the version? Okay.
Nope. I think we figured out where the mistake was on my part. Okay, I see. Meeting results. There we go. All right. So we have up above. We still have cemetery fees not grayed out because that's going to be coming back on the 16th for discussion? 18th?
It came back on Monday evening. There was a short presentation on Monday evening, and then it is coming back on the 18th for a vote.
Right, okay. So let's move forward then to the next item that has not yet been addressed, which would be reworking of CIP dollars, shift Central Park Pad 3 from debt service to REIT debt service savings, project costs shown in REIT below.
And maybe can I do one other orientation thing for this before we get started? If you, sorry, we're sharing the maneuvering of this. If you scroll down to the bottom of this spreadsheet, there's a section of impact on fund balance. And there's also a section that is showing the cumulative impact on REIT. So at the last deliberation session, there was a lot of discussion of how much additional REIT could be used, and there were various thumbs up, thumbs down items related to REIT. And since it seemed like that was an area that was of interest to the council in the version of this that I sent out last week, it does catalog either decisions, thumbs up, thumbs down decisions that you've already made, or a proposal that you still need to consider tonight, and tallying the REIT impacts below.
I see. Okay. Can you tell me how, before we dive into that reworking of CIP dollars, can you just say at a high level, you've got Can you just talk about the summary of each of the sections and the summary dollars and how we get to the major dollars down below?
Yes, I can. I'd be happy to do that. So column C, is basically what we had been working off of the last deliberation session. I don't remember the dates anymore. They're all kind of blending together. But the last deliberation session, and in the communication I sent out last week, I did alert you that the version we were working on the last time, there was a formula error. It was not picking up the $77,000 reflected in cell C7. So that's been corrected. So the top section was the mayor's proposed budget and then changes that we had discussed to the mayor's proposed budget prior to the last deliberation session. And then this second section here, rows 9 through 31 were what we heard at the last, that we heard from all of you about changes that you wanted to contemplate to the mayor's proposed budget. So at the last deliberation session, we came back and we attached dollars to those concepts, and you had started going through each of those. The items that are shown in gray on the screen were things that the council did thumbs up, thumbs down to. So we're not planning on focusing on those tonight unless council has a desire to go back to them. So the tally of that was $682,000 impact on the budget. And then in starting lines 33 through 54 are the administration's response of how to bring the budget back into balance, with one additional add back that we want to discuss with you. So when you tally all of that up, the net impact on balancing is to the good $90,000, but that also assumes using fund balance for the city services assessment study. And so that's reflected down here because we're at a net positive down in the fund balance impact. And then there's one other addition to the spreadsheet since the last meeting, reflected in rows 58 through 63. We did hear at the last session that council wanted to consider adding back funding for contracts for service. So we've added that below, and certainly if there are other things that council wants to discuss adding back or changing to the budget through its deliberations this evening that we haven't previously captured, we will reflect those in that section of the deliberations this evening.
So if we are at the end of the day to get to a balance, if we were to get to a summary of changes that equated to the same ending fund balance as the administration's initial proposed budget, what two numbers would be the same? Would it be the 13,550 equaling the 13,667?
It would be, well, the mayor's proposed budget had fund balance at 13.7 million. We did come back in response to council's request to, look at how we would retally things based on some of your desires. We did come back. One of our balancing strategies was to use fund balance for the city services, the city-wide service assessment. So I guess a little bit depends on what your definition of, what phase of the proposed budget are you talking about, because the administration is supportive of using fund balance for the citywide assessment. So I guess it depends on what you're, do you want original proposed or modified proposed? But either one of those numbers would be, if you were striving to maintain that fund balance, it would be striving to either land on 13.7 million or 13.5 million. So cells C67 or cell C69.
Gotcha. And This is the hazards of spending most of the last week with the flu. So I apologize, and I apologize for the sneezing that I'll be doing later this evening. Tell me again how much ending funds balance column G uses at the moment.
Column G uses, so.
You have column G balanced out now, right?
Yeah, so, well,
G67
no, well.
and C67 are the same number?
No, the issue with column G is actually not ready to do a final tally, because the only things that are populated right now in column G are the decisions the up and down decisions that council has made thus far.
The gray decisions.
The gray decisions. So it's not tallying, for example, it's not tallying or including in the tally, for example, C23, because the council, we haven't gotten the direction from the council of, are you interested in this being included or not? Similarly for cell C23, not included. So the numbers in column G, you can certainly look at it and you can certainly look at the impact, but I would argue at this point in the discussion, it's probably premature until council gets through more of these decisions to see the bottom line impact.
Understood. But the differences between C67 and what G67 will eventually be is in some ways of thinking where the delta, where the new council bogey as compared to the revised administrative recommendation?
Correct.
Okay, great. All right, are there any questions? Councilmember Walsh.
Not to bring up a formula issue, but I have to.
Is there a formula issue?
Cell C60 in the new council request is not referenced in any formula?
Yeah, and that's not referenced because that was not part of the original tally that we were working on, and it was kind of a placement issue as it came up
later. So if once we get to discussing that, can we move it into something?
Yeah, and it does go into G, and let's just double check. G is in the formula.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you for catching that. Other questions before we go to the line item level? I don't see any. No? Okay. So let us continue. Let us go back up to the discussion of CIP dollars. Does whoever, and I can't remember who proposed this, but Councilmember Hunt, would you like to speak to this one?
I was asking about a number of projects. I think this is one that I mentioned, but my bigger question was around the number of projects and the flexibility that we might have funding things in the CIP differently and taking a bigger look at the CIP. So this ends up changing the general fund by $6,480, but I think it was more to introduce some flexibility into how we're funding things from the CIP, because this can be funded by REIT, not everything can be funded by REIT.
So are you continuing to want to make this a proposed addition?
Yes, but I do also recognize that it's small.
All right. Other thoughts on this one before we take it up or down? All right, off to a blistering pace to begin with. So, does everybody understand a vote in the affirmation results in the money, the Central Park Pad 3 would move to REIT, thus saving the general fund $6,480? I'm seeing a head nod from our director. Councilmember Goodman, do you have a question? No? Okay. 1, 2, 3. That would be 6 yeses and 1 no. So we will add that to our proposed revisions. Completion of Title 18. This, I think, was also Councilmember Hunt.
Yes, so this would be, my understanding is that this would be the additional work necessary to align with the strategic plan's environmental stewardship components in our Title 18 code. So I think this is important because it's one of the things that we identified as a very important thing we needed to do to address the strategic plan environmental stewardship, and it wasn't completed in the work that's been ongoing that council will shortly, I think, be reviewing for the rework of Title 18. So I do think this is really important work. One thing I wanted to ask the administration is if it would be possible for council to better understand the scope of this before it begins. Before the work begins.
Councilmember Hunt, members of the council, good evening. We have a planned update for the council at the end of November. So if you would like, we can include it there, or Keith is here and can speak to it now, but we're already planning a pretty extensive update for the council that week of Thanksgiving.
Okay, so that would be the update both for the work that's already been completed, but as well as for this additional work that would be done.
And a larger discussion on what's ahead. So that would be a subset of the discussion of what's ahead.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we need to have that larger conversation. But I am very supportive of this, and I think it's important work that we need to do.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. How far along are we in this work? Without this increase, when would it be done by the current plan? And does this amount truly reflect what the cost required to complete it earlier?
City Administrator?
I'm unclear on the second, and Keith, why don't you get near a microphone in the meantime? I'm unclear on the second part of the question.
I'm going to have to reconstruct it then. This is work that's ongoing now.
That's correct, and we are.
And there is a current plan to get this work done in some time frame. And so how far along, well, I don't know how much I care about how far along. This proposal is spend this extra money, we bring that completion date forward sometime into 2020 instead of to 2021.
No, the completion date, we still believe will be during 2020. Mm-hmm. We need to talk with the council more. I am concerned that this is an important time to get public and stakeholder comment. Mm-hmm. And so depending on that public and stakeholder comment that we're going to propose to you at the end of November to conduct at the very beginning of the year, that will, I think, impact the final time frame. But we still believe that it may be the very end of next year, but we still believe that we can get that done. So this additional $50,000 should not have a material impact on the very end, because we still believe we have about another year. Is that a fair statement, sir?
That is absolutely a fair statement. I think this issue is more about technical competence on the environmental issues or not. So the team that the city is contracted with includes legal, parks, because the Green Necklace and getting that incorporated into the code was a priority for the council, planning. And so the team that was put together really didn't include the environmental expertise we need, that I believe we need right now. So with this resource, we would execute a separate contract. We've been talking with a couple different firms. I do have early proposals on what that would cost to do both. Because our critical area ordinance is a composite of wetland streams, critical aquifer recharge areas, stuff related to water, and then stuff related to geology, like steep slopes, seismic hazards, those kind of things. We're talking about actually bringing on board 2 separate consultants to combine to do that critical area work. So this additional resource gives us the ability to get a better product, one that I think is in keeping with what the community and the council are looking for. If this $50,000 is not allocated, then staff will need to do that critical area ordinance update, and it will just be a different level of, we're asking to bring in expertise that are familiar with critical areas to do that work. That's what this is about.
Thank you. May I suggest, it's labeled completion Title 18. And what we're talking about is augmenting the current project staff with additional resources to bring this extra level of expertise in. So I was a little bit confused by this title called completion.
It's a scope increase, I think is what it is. Increase the scope of the work.
For the reasons that you just described. And you said you have an idea of the number?
I do. So we've gotten proposals both from Herrera and from Golder Associates, and in combination, they're hovering around $50,000. So this is the right number.
Okay, that was going to be my question. So so I think just for the record, I don't think we should be calling it completion Title 18.
Like supercharge?
It's just additional resources. It's, it's additional expertise.
Title 18.
For Title 18.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
No, this is a real simple one. I think you and Wally could handle this one. This is a one-time deal, right? We're not going to do this in 2021, 2022, and onward into in subsequent years, right?
So the existing code is 20 plus years old. So I think if we do this, it's good for at least 10 years, with minor tweaking by staff and the council along the way.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's something we definitely need to do, and I applaud you for wanting to bring in the resources to do it right. I think that's awesome. I guess what I'm pondering and using just a lens that I've been using, if this is a one-time thing, this is a real good candidate for fund balance, as opposed to taking it out of general fund. So it gives us a little bit of relief there. I'm trying to look for fund balance opportunities that are one-time things so that we're not setting ourselves up for having a difficult discussion next year about what's coming out of fund balance. So I would like to see this $50,000 included in the budget, but I'd like to see it as a good candidate for using fund balance.
How is using fund balance different from reducing ending fund balance?
It's the same, but I think there's a question in my mind about, I don't want to see us doing things that are ongoing activities that we're going to have to kick the can down the road next year and say, oh shoot, well we funded that out of fund balance. So I want to be able to identify things that are one time, we're done with this. Fund balance is a great candidate for funding that, and then we can move onto a different discussion about if we want to dig deeper for some other reason into things that are ongoing activities.
Understood. Council Deputy President Batiste.
This is a question for you, Keith. Just trying to follow, you said there are two consultant groups that you would need to bring in, and if we did not do that, then that would be something that would fall to staff. Is there one group that is, more important where staff could do part of the work and we could sort of a half and half type of scenario, or are they both really critical in different areas where staff doesn't have that exact expertise?
So, great question, council member. My opinion would be that the value that we're gaining from bringing consultants in for this work is they work in a lot of different cities, and they have, worked on codes like ours, and they've also worked for developers to kind of do assessments for them on the properties. So they're coming at it from both sides, a more composite look, and I think they're they have those individual expertises within their organizations. So rather than having like one person who's familiar with streams and wetlands and critical area critical aquifer recharge areas, they'll have one person that's their stream expert and one person that there's wetland expert. So it's more specialized because they have multiple people that just do that for a living, whereas we're doing zoning and comprehensive plans and all the stuff that we have to do for municipal planning. So I just think it's a deeper resource, and we'll get a better product. And this is, again, I looked at it through the lens of, we haven't done this for 20 years. We're doing something that hopefully will stand as a good product for the next maybe 20 years. Let's bring forward the best code that we can bring.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right, so the vote on this is a thumbs up, is a vote to add $50,000 in spend to the completion of Title 18 to augment the Title 18 effort as described. That would reduce the ending fund balance by $50,000. A vote for no would be to not do that. So if there aren't, you look quizzical. No? Okay. If there aren't any questions, then 1, 2, 3. And that is 6 yeses and 1 no. So we will add that to the baseline going forward. The next, we have several items that are not budgetary impact, and I think that the point, I think the conversation at this point would be, do we add them to the council letter that goes with the, that accompanies the budget? The first is to, in 2020, add to the work plan, examining selling Tibbetts Creek Manor and other city surplus property. City Administrator, I want to ask, this is expected that it can be done with existing city staff, which is why there isn't a specific cost associated with it?
No. We believe we need additional time to talk with the council to scope this. It's a pretty broad line. So my anticipation is if you'd like this on your work plan, we would come back and talk about each of the 2 issues that are listed there separately. One, I think we see Tibbetts Manor as a standalone question versus other city surplus property. I would imagine that if the council says explore Tibbetts for sale, that is something that we could largely do on our own. If the council says, gee, there's lots of city surplus property, let's examine that. That's probably something beyond existing resources. So that at that point, we would, I think, want an opportunity to scope a project and then have some sense of what that might cost. So feeling was that we could have that as a discussion separate from the budget.
Got it. Well, I'll speak to this. It's those who've been on council for a while know that I've asked about Tibbetts Creek Manor for a while. I continue to wonder whether it's something that we want to be in the business of having. And particularly this year, as we look to being careful with our money. The other thing that I see about Tibbetts Creek Manor is what would it mean potentially to the park? If we, well, I guess if we sold it, it wouldn't help the park. But there have been talk over the years of recreation-themed businesses in the area. There seems like there's a lot of opportunity with what that property could do, other than what it's being used for currently. So I would very much like to consider that, and would be interested in hearing what it would take to do a larger surplus property evaluation, which is a conversation folks in the city have been talking about for a very long time. So other points? Councilmember Ray?
I agree completely with that, and I actually would broaden the scope if we get to this point. I think we just need to look at all of our facilities, because declaring something surplus is in that statement, there's a value judgment. And I think we own a lot of properties that we need to look at and put together an overall facilities plan. And it's like, where do we want to have physical facilities? And do we want to start to unload some that are less used and look at acquisition of new ones that would further the mission of the city? So I would like to see this as a fairly broad look at all city facilities and what the plan is for them and what the cost of that would be.
Council Deputy President Batiste.
So I would just echo what Councilmember Ray just talked about. I think a broader look, which is, I think we've talked about that in the past, and just looking across at what the different city surplus properties are, and I would advocate to just add that to the letter. I think that makes sense.
Pardon me. Thank you. Other comment? Councilmember Goodman?
Well, I think we're talking about two different things, and if we're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down on just sort of a general come back to the council for a scoping of what it looks like we want to examine, then I'm for that.
All right. I don't see any other mics going live at the moment, so it sounds like does the administration understand the consensus, which is to have a broad conversation in 2020 about current or future municipal properties?
Yes.
All right. No dollars on this, so we're voting whether to put this in the council president's letter. 1, 2, 3. 7 yeses. Next, we have arch increase. Does somebody, I can't remember who was, Councilmember Hunt?
That is mine, and it's not, it's basically a correction to the way that it was indicated in our budget notebook, because it sort of pre-decided what we were doing with funds, which we haven't yet decided.
All right. Do you think that that requires clarification in the council president letter?
If you like, sure.
Okay,
All right.
I guess that's what I think so, because I think that's what we do with these sort of changes that are not changing the budget,
But so,
not changing dollar amounts, but is indicating a change that council would like.
And we can also update it we'll be producing, an adopted budget book, and so we can reflect that change in the adopted budget book as
Okay.
well.
That would address my concern.
all right. So I think that the addition would be to have language clarifying that the arch increase has not been specifically targeted yet and will be decided in the upcoming year. Anybody want to speak to it otherwise, or we can just take a vote? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Excuse me.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah, I'm not quite tracking. This is not a budget item, and so
Right.
the request would, I'm sorry, could you say it again?
It would be to put a line item in the council president letter that accompanies the budget, specifying, just clarifying that the direction for the arch increase has not been set yet, and that it would be, specific direction would be given in 2020.
Okay, is that any different than, it's just a clarifying point?
Yep.
It's not a budget item, we just want to be clear that this is going to be set next year,
That we have an expectation that it'll be set.
and that is the current plan, right?
We have had at other times things in the council president letter,
Yeah, I'm just trying to
clarifying our
understand where we are, where we are. This is a comment about a plan that's already exists, okay.
34.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. It's on page 34, and the description of this is that there's an increase to arch contributions and administrative fees, and then in the funding source, it talks about using the state legislature's decision to share a portion of the state's sales tax revenues to support affordable housing. So when we had Jean talk about this funding, we were presented with information, but we were told that we would later discuss what to do with this state sales tax pass-through money that we can use to support affordable housing. So I wanted to clarify that, because it doesn't, there's a paragraph in here that doesn't make it clear that we haven't yet decided that, and it seems to me to allocate that funding for something. So whether it's changed in the budget book, that would also address my concern. Whether it's addressed in the letter, that would also work. I just want to make it clear that we haven't yet taken that action regarding those state sales tax pass-through pass-through funding.
Specifically, that we haven't targeted it to arts yet, is your point?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess I misstated it a little bit before, and I apologize. So.
And that is, thank you, and that's just better to reflect what was discussed and kind of the direction more or less agreed to when we discussed it earlier. Yeah, so there's, all right, so there already is a result in a plan. It's maybe this document doesn't reflect that accurately.
And the administration a couple meetings ago indicated that we were very happy to take out that language, and I think it's very appropriate also to include it in the council president letter, and then I think that addresses the issue.
Yeah, so we would be updating the budget book as well.
There'll be an adopted budget, so in the adopted budget, that document would not contain that language.
All right, thank you.
All right, so let me restate it. The thumbs up, thumbs down is on adding language to the council president letter, clarifying that this money that we would be getting back from Olympia has not yet been decided as to how it would be spent on low-income. This targeted low-income housing money has not been decided where it would be spent yet. So with that, 1, 2, 3. 7 yeses. Thank you. Next, we have no 1% COLA for non-reps. The general fund impact on this would be $71,774 that we would get back if we removed the 1% COLA. Is there someone who wants to speak to this one? Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah, I originally proposed it just as I was looking across. As you know, philosophically, I don't think we should be raising taxes and looking at ways that for one time in an organization that is experiencing this decline in revenues as we are, you have to take extraordinary measures, and sometimes, and it's not uncommon at all. It's unfortunate, that this is kind of selective because it's not all employees, but I certainly have a lot of experience and have seen it many times in the commercial world where people have to participate in the belt tightening that's going on. So that is, and then you make adjustments. Maybe the market changes as well, but you find ways to get everybody to be involved with riding through what might be a tough time. That's not an uncommon strategy that's used in the commercial world. And so I propose this as part of just one of a couple other items which we've already discussed as a package, as another way of doing the budget. So far, I haven't been successful on any single one of those line items. This body, if we voted on them, has turned them all down. So, though we still have to talk about the revenue one. So this was part of that package for me. And that's why it's on there.
Got it. And you want to continue proposing this proposal?
Well, we haven't had a formal vote, or I don't believe we have, so I think that we should. And so my reason is there, and I would like to have us have a vote for it.
Thank you. Other comments on this one? No. Nobody? Councilmember Goodman.
Sure. Well, I always appreciate creative thinking, and I have said many times that I think all ideas are on the table. So it's not that I don't appreciate suggestion, Paul. I don't think we're at that critical time in budgeting. I don't think it's that critical that we need to think about no COLA at all. So at this point, I wouldn't support that.
Other comments? Councilmember Ray.
So, in just thinking about this, I'm starting to feel the same way I feel about this as I do with other things that are one-time adds or deletes that are not sustainable in the long term. So for us to do this year, that means next year we would be in a position of not being able to take that same cost reduction and no way to fill that hole. So I just, I think it's a slippery slope, and also in the long term, I mean, if you look at the cost of living increases in this geography, it's well above the national average, and attracting good people is still one of our major challenges. So as Councilmember Goodman said, I appreciate the creativity, but I just don't think it's in the best interest of the city.
Council Deputy President Batisse.
So I think, I would echo what some of my fellow council members have said, is that we need to look at everything, and so I appreciate looking at the 1% COLA, but we've got the 1% COLA focused on one group, and that's going to be difficult for me to look at, but looking at everything right now really makes sense. And I guess another version that we could look at would maybe be doing, I don't know, 0.5%, that kind of thing. But we, typically when we're talking about 2%, 2.5%, and coming down to 1, and this is saying no, 1% COLA, it's just, I don't think I can support that.
Thank you. Other comment? Nope. All right. I am not going to support this modification because I saw it when it was part of potentially as part of a raft that was stretching to try to get avoiding of the utility tax, but I have real concerns. I think the biggest challenge to any organization, private or municipal, governmental, is attracting and retaining talent. And the market, I can only speak for the market for mechanical and aerospace engineers right now, but it is as brutal as I have seen it in finding people. And so I worry that if we dropped below 1%, that would impact our ability to retain people, and that would be a real problem to me. So, Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's actually out in private industry, COLAs aren't that common. They're outside of where there is labor representation as well, where you have a contract. Most of the industry, especially where in this area where the labor market is tough, is much of that compensation is based upon performance. And of course, they have different strings that they can pull there as well. So it's I think we want to be careful about how we compare to other industries, because they have different forces at play. But in general, cost of living wages in the private sector aren't that prevalent in most of those industries here in the Northwest.
Thank you. Any other comments? So we'll go thumbs up or thumbs down. A thumbs up is to move from 1% COLA to 0% COLA, thus returning $71,747 projected to the 2020 ending fund balance. A vote for no is to leave it at 1% and not recoup the $71,747. 1, 2, 3. That's 1 in favor and 6 opposed. We will move on. Class Comp Total Compensation Evaluation 2020 Work Plan item. City Administrator, you look like you want to opine.
Just that this was brought up by the council. We agree that this is work that needs to continue to be done. I think as we have talked about the class comp study over the last many months, the total compensation issue regarding benefits is the second phase of this. And so it's our intention to move forward with that. We believe that the information that was gathered in the first part of the study is sufficient. We don't believe believe we'll need additional outside resources, but there's a series of policy discussions that we'll need to be having with the council. So our recommendation is that it be placed on the 2020 work plan.
And remind me, this differs from the original budget proposal in what way? Because it's total compensation and not just salary?
The original budget proposal was silent to this. So I think there was a discussion a few meetings ago by the council concerned about what the next steps were, concerned about the benefits portion of this. So we added it to the list to be reflective of that discussion. But it's been our intention to move forward in 2020 with the second phase anyway.
Got it. So it's just clarifying that the council expects that when the conversation occurs, it will also, that we will also be evaluating benefits as part of the overall.
And again, consistent with other actions that the council may wish to add that to the council president's letter, just to confirm that message to the administration.
All right. And so that is what we are going to thumbs up or thumbs down, whether we want to add specific clarification that the class comp should reflect total compensation, including benefits. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? All right. A thumbs up is to say yes, put it in the letter. Thumbs down is to not put it in the letter. 1, 2, 3. 7 up. With that, we will move on. Does the administration want to start the conversation about the restored traffic signal engineer, City Administrator Bobkowitz?
Yes, we would like to speak to it, but Beth has just a brief comment before we move forward.
Yeah, so in this section, there's one line, row 16, Consolidated City Hall. Council decided to, at the last meeting, to cut that money out, and it was not reflected in cell G, so we're moving it to cell G. And before I did it, I wanted to make sure you all knew it, so you weren't surprised later.
Or thought you were somehow slipping something past us?
I would never want you to think that.
Thank you.
We're on a roll here.
All right, with that, restoring the traffic signal engineer.
Councilor President, members of the council, there have been a few different discussions about this, starting really with the discussion on the traffic cameras. In my investigation of how those cameras were operated and used, came to the understanding that one of the positions that the administration was proposing to leave vacant was this traffic signal engineer. And it's my opinion, learning more about the circumstances, that this is a position that we should continue to fund. And so we have made an adjustment with the administration's, the mayor's second set of recommendations with the budget to add that position back into the budget. The council spent a good deal of time talking about this matter generally the other evening. Certainly we're happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. Could you explain exactly, and again, please, a different meeting, explain exactly what the traffic signal engineer would do and the benefit of that, really?
Certainly. Sheldon is here and missed good parts of this discussion for a nice vacation that you just returned from. But I know that your staff has brought you up to speed. Maybe you can speak to what the position has done, that the position has been vacant for some time, what we've done in the interim, and sort of your assessment. The council hasn't had a chance to really hear your take on all this, but your assessment of how this position fits into the larger transportation functions within PWE.
So the position's been vacant for about a year, plus or minus, which we've been trying to fill the position, and we've been unsuccessful in doing that. We've had a couple of candidates, but at the end, they've all declined the position. The position actually monitors the signals, monitors the timing of the signals and the like, and then uses the traffic cameras that you guys were having conversations about the other night to help diagnose problems that are going on with the traffic signals as we get complaints and things like that, and then coordinates with the traffic signal techs for the repairs of the signals and getting them back up and operating. And then periodically, we get annual traffic counts And that engineer would also run synchro model so that they can tweak the timing and the coordination between the signals and so forth, so we maximize the ability for traffic flow along the corridors. And so it's a continuum effort that that engineer does. For the past year or so, we've been contracting out with a consultant to actually do that work. It's difficult to do that out of house because the coordination between the signal techs and the engineer, it's a little bit more difficult because it's a remote engineer. Currently, we're under contract with Jacobs Engineering to redo the timing of four major corridors in town as a result of the new road being built. Otherwise, I probably would have been able to use a signal engineer to do that. So.
And Council President, if I can maybe just add sort of the last piece of this. We've had difficulty because the position, the good qualified candidates that we've had have come here, realized how much it costs, look at the salary, and have decided not to leave their other positions because the salary was not commensurate with the higher cost of living here. I think what we're going to need to do, should the council leave this position in the budget, I think, is to look more carefully at the position. The council has, I think, expressed very clearly an interest to do more in the area of traffic signals, to position us to a next generation piece. We've talked a lot about what Bellevue does. Bellevue has several of these positions on their staff, from my understanding. We may need to make this a little bit more interesting. I think we have talked in other venues about, I know, dispatchers, and looking at, what can we do to retain dispatchers, and how can we maybe tweak some classifications so that, our positions look a little bit more attractive than perhaps other positions. My sense is we need to do the same thing with this. And so we would go back, look at the job description, inform it with the discussions that the council's had over the last few weeks, and hopefully craft something that is a little bit more attractive. And if we need to add some additional dollars, I don't imagine it'd be a lot of additional dollars, but if we do, we would likely come back and do that. But I think certainly I've learned over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks of the importance of this position and how it furthers the council's goals on transportation and mobility, and so that's why we decided to put it back.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
So I appreciate City Administrator Bobquitz mentioning that this role might need to be tweaked and thus the cost changed. As it stands now, I think it's pretty expensive for what we've stated that we would get from my perspective. And so I don't think I can support this additional cost in here when I'm trying to balance it out against all of the other things that we want to do. So I'm not going to support this.
Councilmember Goodman.
Sheldon, what's the cost comparison between the position, what it costs for the position, and the contracting out?
We've been, right now, just to do the 4 major corridors is costing us around $100,000.
So we're contracting out for each project?
In this case, we had one project that changed the whole grid on the north side. So we had 4 major corridors that needed to be redone, and that cost us about $100,000. We still have 1, 2, 3, another 4 major corridors that are probably due for having to be redone again. And then it's not a one-time deal. About every couple of years or so, you should probably take a look at the full corridors as development happens, regional and local development. So it's a continuum. It's not just a one-time and it's good for 10 years or 20 years.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm getting the information that I want. I'm looking for whether we're saving money by contracting it out, and I'm also not hearing anything in this meeting or the meetings that we've had recently that leads me to believe that we have a robust program that involves the traffic signal engineer for a bunch of reasons, including technical reasons, limitations that we have with our current system. So, help me help you. I'm not getting excited.
Yeah, no, I hear you. The other thing that the engineer does, and Mr. Bobkowitz mentioned it, is that, when we start to look at upgrading our system and so forth, the position would be in charge of those capital investments and working the design and getting them constructed. When we had our system today built, the position was actually brought on board at that time and actually managed the implementation of the design and construction of all the fiber network, the signal controllers, things like that, that are in place today that allow us to coordinate our signals better than old school way. So the position is also one that would help out in the capital implementation for signal construction, design, things like that too, not just solely in the ITS. And then I believe also, as Mr. Bobkowitz mentioned, we would probably expand the interest a little bit in there of, regional operations and things like that to try and be better coordinated through the region for traffic operations and flow.
Thank you. The projects that are going on the corridors right now, is that something that the contract folks are working on right now?
No, we've had to redistribute work within the department, which has affected the ability for us to move to move quicker on other capital projects. For instance, Southeast 43rd got redistributed to a different engineer. The signal operations engineer was going to be the engineer in charge of that signal project.
Well, what's the contract firm working on right now?
The contract firm right now, they're working on the corridor timing and coordination for Northwest Gilman Boulevard, Northwest Sammamish Road, East Lake Sammamish Parkway, Southeast 62nd, and they'll be coordinating also with WashDOT signals through the interchanges as those corridors intersect those interchanges.
Is that a part of the... So I'm asking the questions because I'm wondering if we need to think about this position later, finish with the contract work that we're being paid for, and maybe think about this later. That's why I'm asking the questions.
But before I go to the next questions, City Administrator?
I'm sorry. I think my mic is causing the feedback, so I apologize. I don't know what to do. I really like what Councilmember Goodman just proposed, and so I've asked the mayor, could we leave this money in the budget and come back to the council when we have more complete answers? I really think that this position can be very valuable. I would hate to lose the funding this evening. We've been lots of moving pieces with the budget. I would like the opportunity to come back and talk more about this. So if the council would agree to leave the position, leave the funding in the budget, I don't know, and with my promise that we will not fill the position until we get authority from the council to move forward with that.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. I do appreciate the administration's being responsive to many of the conversations that happened here two times now in regular council meetings or work sessions where we talked about mobility, we talked about the ITS and the cameras. All that prompted a pretty good conversation, and you indeed did sense from this council that there's a sensitivity and a desire for improvement. It goes within the whole spirit of doing a master mobility plan as well. Prior to those conversations, the administration, and I compliment the administration for identifying a number of positions, and this being one that, we are going to tighten our belt, and we are willing to take these positions off the table as part of an overall comprehensive budget balancing proposal. And I want to stay there. Yes, you were responsive, but in those dialogue, when I was involved with those conversations sitting up there in the dais, it was never really my intent, and we got to get another resource to help make all of this happen now. And so I recognize you just kind of changed the proposal than I was interpreting this. But I think given these circumstances, what we've already done to try to balance this budget and some decisions this council still needs to make, I don't think we should be entertaining putting something back in in, which would be an ongoing expense. It's not in the one-time category. And I don't think there's anything stopping the administration to do exactly what you did, except what you just described or asked us to consider. That wouldn't also just be in a budget amendment and let's reauthorize this position and here's the plan. And I think that would be more appropriate given these times.
Councilmember Hunt.
I had a similar question to Councilmember Goodman, and I wanted to make sure I understood. So does the contract currently, the annual contract is approximately $100,000? Did I hear that?
No, that was the
Okay.
project-specific one. That's in addition to the $40,000 that we were using annually.
So
This year, we're
140.
expending roughly $140,000.
Okay. And that comes from a contract budget within PWE? It's services, professional services budget within PWE?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
professional services.
Councilmember Ray.
So I really appreciated the very robust conversation we had over the last several weeks relative to traffic cameras, and I think that, as the city administrator pointed out, it really did highlight some of the potential for improving traffic flow using adaptive control signaling. So as we're having this discussion, I'm thinking that what I would like to propose we consider is holding on the traffic engineer right now, but investing some amount of money, I'm going to put $50,000 out there, to actually do a study to see what the potential benefits of going and what the feasibility and cost and potential benefits of a adaptive signal control program similar to what we talked about that they're doing in Bellevue. And then, depending upon how that pans out, then we can make a decision about where to go forward with the traffic engineer. The reason I'm interested in this is I think we're not going to pave our way out of our mobility problems, and actually speeding traffic through town is one way that we can help with some of the real problems we're seeing. And I would like to have somebody who knows this area very cold and has experience in it to come and tell us what is possible for us. And I think it could be really valuable information as we move forward with our overall mobility strategy.
All right, so.
There was an alternative proposal in there.
Yeah, I hear it. What I think I hear is sort of bifurcating this into two pieces. The first piece would be holding the 184, but contingent upon further approval of a council plan. And then the second vote would be authorizing $50,000 for a study of adaptive transportation. Do we have confidence that $50,000 would be enough to do such a study, Councilmember Ray? Or where's that 50K come from?
That 50K is coming out of the air.
Councilmember Goodman.
I thought we heard from City Administrator Bodkowitz at our meeting before, or the meeting before, one of the two prior meetings, that was on the work plan anyway, that I don't know how much the city, it was going to be on the work plan anyway to look at our options for that newer technology. So I don't know that we need $50,000. So I was going to ask him to clarify.
City Administrator.
So the recommendation would be that we don't hire the position until we come back to the council. I think we could come back to the council with a variety of approaches, have the $184,000 in abeyance. If we can find out what it might take to hire a third party and have that dollar amount more firmly in mind, we can continue to do some additional work. As I think Councilmember Goodman alluded to, I've been thinking very deeply about transportation mobility. I do think that there are opportunities for us with existing resources to better allocate those existing resources to do what the council would like to see done. Having this $184,000 put aside to allow some flexibility moving forward would be useful. And if you wanted to spend it on a study at a later point, fine. If we're able to make a more compelling case for a different position, then you'd have that. Certainly as the year progresses, that's a 12-month number, so we wouldn't need all that. So perhaps if the council agrees to put that aside, put it in the council president's letter with the direction and the thoughts that you have, and then we'll come back as a 2020 work plan with future information.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
So my understanding was also that we were going to be looking at this, looking at how much the technology would actually cost, and then looking at how much it would cost to improve our way that we're using the traffic signals. So I think that, to me, it makes more sense to not include this item at this time, also to not include a study, because I don't think we know if that study can be done in-house, or if it can't, how much it would cost. We just have never considered any of that. So I think we should consider this as a work item to better understand the technology and what its limitations are and what benefits we would get. And then I think we're probably going to need to figure out a long-term funding strategy to do that. And so at this time, it seems like this is a step that we aren't yet, isn't part of a bigger plan, and so I am not supportive. And as has been mentioned, if this is the plan later on, then we can make a budget amendment. So that would be my preference.
Council Deputy President Batiste.
So I'm going back and forth about a couple different items here. One is holding this in the budget, and the other is bringing it back, as Councilmember Winterstein talked about, in terms of an amendment that would come up later. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to think about doing a study. It seems like if you take this up to the 10,000-foot level, we talk continuously and have been talking continuously about mobility, about traffic, and bringing in, trying to find a person who specializes in that, and being able to hire that person in to oversee any kind of strategic direction and implementation is usually, I just in my mind, the way that you would go about really helping with all of that analysis that needs to be done, as opposed to consultants or sort of, I guess, a little bit of a Band-Aid type of approach, which it sounds like a little bit of what we're doing right now, because we're bringing in consultants and it's get this project done, and then we need more consultants, and we're going to do this project, and no one is being able to really focus and weave all of these issues together. And that concerns me, especially in this area that's so incredibly important and that we hear about all the time. So I'm still a little bit up in the air whether I would like to see this held in the budget or brought back as an amendment. But I would rather see us go forward with that person who would develop that strategic direction and be an expert on adaptive cameras and that kind of thing, and help what kind of technology would be ushered in next.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
So I wouldn't support a study, because I don't think that we need a study for either one of the two things we're talking about. I don't think we need a $50,000 study to begin looking at other technology. I'll just call it adaptive technology for now. We were told we could just do that with staff, and we should have, a city of our size should have some people on staff who can at least look into it at initially. So I don't think we need to spend $50,000 on that. I'm not opposed to allocating the money, but not spending it until the administration comes back and we approve of what it's going to be spent on. I'm not opposed. I'm not strongly opposed to that.
Thank you. I like the idea of keeping, setting aside $184,000 and then having the administration come back to us on this. You know, in a year where almost everything we're talking about is minimizing damage, preserving this, not cutting back that, this would feel good to actually reach out on an issue that time and time again, our community tells us is the #1 issue in the community. So with that in mind, I would support this line item. Council Deputy President. Oh, Councilmember Winterstein.
To be clear, if we're about to ask the question, I believe the question is whether or not to fund a position. And I think that fundamentally is different than, do we have some funds earmarked so that we have something to work with and figure out how to proceed? Funding a position is a different question. So the question I'm going to be answering when I vote on this is, do we want to fund the position?
Fair enough. Other comment? Councilmember Goodman.
Somebody should tell us what the alternative then is, so that when we're voting, it's,
I
so what
believe-
is that, what is the question? To fund it with conditions, or what?
City Administrator?
Had to phone a friend. We're asking that we would fund the position, that we would not fill the position until the administration comes back and has a further discussion with the city council about next steps with traffic management and our larger plans for transportation and mobility.
All right, any further questions? So a thumbs up in this case will be to fund the position, to include benefits to the tune of 100, that is the number including benefits, right? To the tune of $184,000, impacting the ending fund balance, but with a clear instruction to the administration not to fill that position until after the council has seen and approved a plan for what we would do with that person. A vote no is to take that item out and not reduce the ending fund balance by $184,000. Councilmember Hunt?
So I heard you say that we would approve it, and then I also heard, I didn't hear that, so I just wondered if there is an approval step for council to actually, because if we fund the position, that is approving, right? The
Yeah,
position?
and I would suspect that the council president will make that very clear in his letter.
Okay.
That there would be a subsequent approval by council
Before the position's filled.
a vote from the council before that position's filled, not just a pro forma 10-minute presentation. Councilmember Ray.
So I'm just trying to cipher how what we're talking about is different than coming back with a budget amendment early next year, or mid next year, or whenever we have this. I mean, we have a mechanism in place with budget amendments to do exactly what we're talking about. So I just don't see the value in doing that. So so I want to understand am I missing something, is my question.
I think it's, well, I'll speak as someone who is in favor of this. I think it's giving direction to next year's council. Make the decision now in the midst of hard choices, that committing that this is, if this passes, it is saying that we'll make that commitment now, and next year's council doesn't have to. The dollar side of it. They just have to approve a plan that's moved forward. But it's putting the line in the sand today rather than putting the line in the sand, asking the next council to put that line in the sand at some point in the future. That's how I view it. City Administrator.
And it retains ongoing revenue to fund the position. So rather than having to look for new revenue, if it is already reallocated, it retains that ongoing revenue in the future.
Councilmember Goodman.
One of the things that over a period of years, maybe every year, the council has had concerns about is the number of budget amendments that we do a couple of times a year. And so that is one of the reasons that I'm not opposed to keeping the revenue there, but conditioning it on future approval of exactly what the scope of that position is going to entail, because then we're not having a brand new conversation, and the question will come up, well, why didn't we do this at budget? Why didn't we deal with it at budget? So I agree with Council President Martz that it's an important position as long as the position is doing important things.
Thank you. Council Deputy President Batiste.
I just wanted to echo that those were my thoughts as well, is that it's different when we have a budget amendment come forward, and it's different to have that money retained and talked about right now. And I'll be supporting this evening.
Councilmember Hunt.
So I think I will be in support because we will approve the position. And I feel like we do need more information about what our options are and what technologies are out there and how much those technologies would cost as well. So I would like to see this come back as part of a bigger picture. But I would like a lot more information to understand what our best option is, and is this actually the best, because I'm not currently convinced.
Other comments? Okay, now I think we're ready to take the thumbs up, thumbs down. I think everybody knows what a thumbs up means and what a thumbs down means. I will restate. A thumbs up means to retain this position in the budget. It would have an impact of $184,000 a year going forward. A vote of a thumbs down would be to not retain this position and not take that impact to the ending fund balance. Councilmember Ray.
I don't think that's right. I think the position is going to be, we're not talking about not retaining the position. We're talking about not funding the position, correct?
How do you retain a position?
We've done
but
that with a
not
lot of
fund it?
positions that we're holding open, so we're not funding them. That's part of our cost reduction strategy throughout this budget. So this seems more like
You're funding the position.
we
Okay.
are holding the position there. We're not taking it away, but we're discussing, we're voting on whether we're funding it or not.
All right, let me restate. A vote yes is to fund the current traffic signal, to restore funding for the traffic signal engineer position, which would have an impact of $184,000 a year on the budget. A vote no would be to not restore funding for the traffic signal engineer position, rather to leave it unfunded going forward. That, 1, 2, 3. And that would be 4 yeses and 3 nos. So we will add it to the baseline going forward. Thank you all for that detailed conversation. We now move into administration recommended options for closing remaining gap. Yes, Councilmember Goodman.
Yes, before we move on to that. So this is on the fly, and I had not, I want to apologize for not bringing it up to the administration before tonight's meeting. And it's not meant to put anybody on the spot, but I'm sure it will a little bit. So we had quite the public comment on Monday night about traffic calming in Old Town and concerns that it's not working. I'm generalizing, it's not working in some ways for the folks. And there were several things that were mentioned, and I know it's only been 2 days, almost exactly, so 48 hours, and I have no idea what the administration has or has not talked about. I know there were concerns about putting, request to put signs back up, request to look at, to do some more speed, put some speed, some speed, those tapes out there, that speed counters, to do that testing again to see how it's working, higher speed humps, police enforcement. There was a lot of complaint that we put that all up there and then we're not enforcing it. So my question to the administration is there something that the council should be thinking about with this budget to potentially address any of the concerns that the neighbors have? And I know you haven't had a lot of time, so I'm just raising the question because we still have some time before we adopt a budget. And so that's really, I just want to make sure that we're being, that if we need to be responsive with respect to the budget to the neighbors, then we're positioned to do that.
So the mayor asked that staff address these issues over the last couple of days. So what we are doing is we've asked both engineering, public works engineering, and police to first go through the list of issues that were raised. So we've gone back and watched the tape to make sure we've captured all of that. Our intent is to have a response for the community at the end of the week as to the status of the various issues that were raised. Some of them will take some additional time. I don't believe we've made any budget determinations yet, but the mayor felt it was very important to get back to the community as quickly as possible. So our intent is to have a release with some information at the end of the week. We'll then continue to look at it. It was discussed at leadership today. Councilmember Hunt raised the question of when we would more appropriately report back a more full report. And so we're looking at probably a study session in February to do that with additional dollars. But I couldn't even give you a dollar amount as an estimate for additional improvements to be made. But we'll be coming back probably in the month of February with
Okay.
that full report.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So we will move on to the section on administration recommended options for closing remaining gap. The first item that we have is transfer additional balance from cable fund to support comms. So Director Goldberg, do you want to speak to that?
I can. So to remind everyone of, I believe we talked about this during the last deliberation session. So the council made its a request that we have talked about, and then our charge was to go back and figure out how to rebalance the budget. And we did ask departments for additional reduction ideas, and the items listed here are ones that the administration feels are doable and reasonable, that won't impact direct service delivery and won't involve laying off additional people. And so one of the ideas that came back through that additional reduction exercise was from our communications department to transfer some additional funds from the cable fund balance to the general fund to support those costs. So are recommending $22,000 for that purpose. So I will ask the council's pleasure. Do we want to address these set of proposed administration recommendations in total and treat them as one combined pack, or do we want to go item by item through these? Because I'm not seeing a frenzy of activity on this initial line item. So I'm going to suggest, unless people want to do otherwise, that we consider these as a collective group of recommendations and ask our questions. Council Deputy President?
I was just going to follow up to your question. Sorry, I did that a little early. It makes sense to me to talk about these all at once, but also if someone had something that they wanted to pull out as opposed to going line item by line item.
Well, yeah, I guess that's what I meant. Not that we have to right this very second go to thumbs up, thumbs down on the whole lot of them, but that we could treat them as a group. And if there's only two of them we want to talk about, we only have to talk about two of them, and potentially make modifications to those, and then vote on the whole package, the whole raft of lines 42 through 52. Councilmember Winterstein.
We should do these one at a time, as we have been. I don't know why we wouldn't. Some of them are proposed revenue increases, which are really shifting from another pot of money into the general fund to cover some of the expenses there. Some of them are actually kind of corrections to that, just because we had some new or updated information, the analysis was more complete. And I believe even I'm looking at some, and then the last one is a genuine expense reduction. So I think because there is a range of types of proposals, even they're all together here, and the way my accounting is like, we're looking at expenditure increases, expenditure decreases, revenue increases, revenue decreases, and I think that's why I think it's important to talk about them individually.
All right, fair enough. So on the first one, transfer additional balance from cable fund to support comms. Any discussion? Councilmember Hunt.
I had asked before about the 22, why that number, and I'm still not really clear. So I think I would just wonder, why not transfer more, or is it possible to transfer more? Because as I pointed out before, the cable fund, the information we do have from the National Community Survey indicates that very few percentage of people are using this as a major source with the cable fund, but we have a lot of other communication channels that we're supporting, as well as those cable, the cable. So I think, to me, it's good to know that we're able to transfer some money, and I'm interested to know if we could transfer more if we wanted to.
Councilmember Hunt, members of the council, this is a fund that the council can allocate however you see is appropriate. I think the Councilmember Hunt raises larger questions that, from an administration's perspective, I don't know that we're prepared to have that larger discussion about how we use video in the city. The $22,000 comes from a request that was made of the department to identify budget reductions. So that $22,000 was offered up. I think Council President Martz, if the council is supportive of this, but you would like, as part of your letter, to ask the administration to look more carefully in 2020 on how we spend those dollars, how we use video, I think that would be an appropriate thing. But we're not prepared at this point to say that other dollars are available to be transferred without spending a little bit more time studying the matter and having a larger discussion with the council.
Councilmember Hunt, did you have a further question?
Well, I heard that we could transfer more and potentially all of it. I mean, not that we would, but is that the answer to the question about how much we could actually transfer out?
We currently have a budget built that funds positions through that fund. The franchise fee is a general revenue. And so over time, if the council wishes to make a change and unfund that operation and spend it other ways, you could. The administration is not prepared this evening to have that discussion because we don't have a recommendation as to how else we would fund that. What would you stop doing? We're not prepared to have that discussion. But if the council wishes in the future to make other adjustments, the administration would be open and willing to have that discussion. We're just not prepared to engage in it tonight.
Okay, right, and I wasn't proposing to engage in that conversation tonight, but I was just asking what the scope of what is possible, because 22,000 seems like a number that I didn't know exactly why it was.
And it was just proposed by staff. After the council's initial deliberations, when we knew we needed additional dollars, this was identified and we took it.
Councilmember Winterstein?
Thank you. Could you repeat again, I understand it came from the recommendation from staff, but what's the purpose, what's the justification again? And then I'm going to have a follow-up question. Just, you said it at the beginning.
For how we got to 22,000?
No, not the number itself, but why this money from this fund for what purpose?
The primary purpose is to help balance the budget. So as we look
operationally, I mean, what is it doing for us operationally?
What is the video operation doing for us?
It's described as transferring from the cable fund into the general fund to support communications.
So yes. So what we're doing is we're taking money that has largely been earmarked by council action to support video operations only. Mm-hmm. We're taking money from that cable fund and transferring it to support other general fund purposes that happen to support communications. In essence, we're supporting all. It's the general fund is the general fund.
But it's justified by their dollars in that fund, which come from franchise fees, I think I just learned tonight. That's correct. That we can make a plausible argument that they should contribute to the expenses incurred by having our communications department.
Based on long-standing council policy, yes.
Okay. Boy, you know more about long-standing policy. How long have you been here? That's good. It's labeled one time. And so with that argument, why would we look at this as a one-time as opposed to not just an ongoing?
because your staff has been as diligent as we can be to support the council on your budget deliberations. However, our diligence has limits. And so in this instance, we have not been prepared to have a larger discussion on how cable franchise fees have historically been spent here. If that's something you would like to do in the future, we would be happy to have that discussion. Many communities have made those transitions over time. This funding model is a very long-standing funding model in this community, and certainly has funded cable operations in other communities around America. But many other communities have, over time, because of budget considerations, had to make a change. We're just not prepared to have a thoughtful discussion at this point on that. We would be happy to in the future.
Can I maybe interject with some additional information? So the reason why it is one time is there is a fund balance. This is basically taking the fund balance within the cable fund, which is derived from franchise fees, and is allocating that to the general fund to help close this gap. It's being deemed as one time because similar to use of general fund balance, once the money's gone, it's gone. And I will also add that we have been seeing a decline in our franchise fees. So, the fund balance is healthy at $462,000. There's money to do this, but it's not using the ongoing dollars. It's dipping into the cable fund balance.
Okay, thank you. And when I hear a justification that says, it would be appropriate to use it this way, and there seems to be a nexus between cable funding and communications. That makes a lot of sense. So thank you. I've got the answer to my question. This is not a proposal to kind of that reflects what you would want to be an ongoing policy going forward. This is just a one-time, and next year, if you do it the same way, then in the baseline, this wouldn't be there. There would not be anything, unless there's some other policy conversation, but this would not become part of the baseline going forward.
That's correct. And Council President, if I could just have 30 seconds, maybe, as I know you tried to kind of talk about this as a group, if I could just take a second. We needed to find $900,000 in additional funds in order to balance the budget based on the council's direction to adjust the utility tax. As a local government professional, when we get to this point in the budget, we try to respond to you in a way that is a responsible way to do that. So you'll see on that there are several one-time transfers. Many of them have a similar story. We were looking for dollars to help you close the gap with the budget. We would, with any one-time expenditure, we would not ever want to see that be a continual expenditure, but we thought that the order of magnitude of those one-time dollars was reasonable given the task that you put before us, and that is to close this gap with a limited amount of tax increase. So that's what you see.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. So I think what you said is you asked the departments to find some more savings or some more ways to
That's correct.
help out. And so I don't know. I'm concerned with just bringing in more money from a fund. We haven't had a larger conversation about what to do with that fund. It is one time. It's only $22,000 in the grand scheme of things, and so I'm wondering, what is it? If we just said no, let's just cut the overall communications fund by $22,000. What would we not do?
It's coming from fund balance. So you're basically shifting dollars to the general fund to help close the gap. So you're not losing any proposed work that would be done in 2020.
But wouldn't that be $22,000 less that we'd spend if we just?
But there is a fund balance. The practice of the council has been to take franchise fees and put them in this cable fund and use them for communications purposes, mostly cable television operations. So that fund has a fund balance.
Yeah.
And so as part of the budget solution, we're proposing that a portion of that be put and transferred on a one-time basis to the general fund to help close the gap.
So I understand that. So what if we said, rather than, Mike, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but rather than transfer any money over to help cover the gap, what if we just said, just cut $22,000 so we don't have to transfer any money in there? I'm wanting to know what wouldn't we do if we said, no, just spend $22,000 less?
I don't know that we're not prepared to address that this evening. We were just saying there's a $400,000 fund balance, is that in the cable fund?
There's a $462,000 fund balance, and maybe it would help this conversation. There is an ongoing transfer every year from the cable fund to the general fund to offset these costs. It's, I believe, $290,000 is the annual ongoing transfer. So this would be upping that by the $22,000, and I'm trying to, on the fly here, we're exceeding the expenditures for the communications department, including cable TV, exceed that amount. So this would just be offsetting costs that are otherwise absorbed by the general fund using an ongoing revenue source. If you didn't take the $22,000, I don't think you would necessarily be needing to look at a cut. General fund balance is another one-time source that could be, as we're going through and balancing, that I think is the balancer.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember Goodman?
Maybe. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if we just not cut $22,000 from the budget and not bring over $22,000 more, just cut 22. That's my question.
Seems like you could make that argument with any department, and that we could cut 50,000 from police, or 50,000 from parks, or 50,000 from public works engineering.
Or use fund balance.
Yeah, and I'm, yes. So that was really my question. And they said they're not able to answer what we wouldn't get. $22,000 I don't think would result in a layoff. I don't know what product we wouldn't get. So that was kind of my question.
Okay. Councilmember Hunt.
I think the two things that are confusing for me is I still don't exactly understand why this amount, like what operationally this amount is representing. And then I also don't think, unless I'm missing something, I don't think this is actually saving us any money. This $22,000 would either sit in a cable fund or it would go into the general fund, but we're just moving it. So it's kind of confusing to me because it doesn't seem to represent a cut, and it's small, and I think it represents some sort of operational thing, but
It's a small depletion of a non-general fund fund amount, right? We have all these ancillary funds around the general fund. Almost all of these are making small depletions of those funds to benefit the general fund to try to come up with $900,000. That they're almost all like that. City Administrator?
Yes, and to be clear, it's absolutely correct. There is no change in service delivery. We are looking at other pots of money that we have access to help balance the general fund. And the $22,000, I asked each of the departments after the initial budget deliberations, when I knew we were going to need $1 million, I went back to the departments and said, give me 4% more. And so I had a long list, some of which you've seen, some of which you haven't seen, of 4% cuts. And I went through them and I looked at which cuts, which reallocations would make the most sense, and that's how we came up with that list. There's E911 account, exactly the same thing. There is money sitting in a non-general fund account that we are shifting over to the general fund to help balance the budget. The court cost to the school safety fund, we're taking we're taking costs that would be general fund costs and shifting it to another fund. This is all an exercise in making up that last $956,000 so that the council can approve a budget that is balanced or takes fund balance to the dollar amount that you specify.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. There's two ways. When you got a gap, and whether it was roughly around $1 million, there's two things that you can do. You can try to increase revenue, or you can actually reduce your expenses. This proposal is a mix. There is some more money flowing into the general fund, but it's actually really not new revenue. It's shifting things from other pots. There's 3 of them, so it's not, of those 11 that are up there, there's actually 3 of them that are shifts. And this is one. The $100,000 from the E911 escrow account is another, and then the $46,294 is another from the school safety fund. And so those total $168,294,000. Okay, so that's how we got that amount of the $1 million that we were trying to do. It's shifting money from other places. So it's not, so there's a $1 million gap, but this was the new revenue side of this. So it's those 3. I understand it. They're all shifts. You have one of them, you have 2 of them marked as one time. And I know I'm grouping these 3 together, but just because they were presented to us as of a similar type of transaction, the one that's unclear to me, you do have the 911 marked as a one-time, but the school safety zone fund is not marked as either ongoing or one-time. Would you also represent that one as a one-time?
No, that's ongoing, because
That would be ongoing.
we're getting ongoing camera enforcement revenue coming in, and as the workload from that grows, there are additional costs on an ongoing basis from the court that we could shift, and the revenue stream is sufficient to support that on an ongoing basis.
Okay, so just my summary comment then would be that the first for the cable fund and the 911 escrow account, these transactions, if approved, would not be part of the baseline for the 2021 budget, but the school safety fund would be.
Correct.
Ongoing. Thank you.
So back to the first of the 11 items, the cable fund to support comms, $22,000. Further questions or comments? So the vote in this case, a thumbs up, would be to transfer $22,000 from the cable fund to support communications. A vote no. Councilmember
We could
Winterstein.
continue. I'll wait till your comment. Go ahead and finish.
A vote no would be to not make that transfer.
Okay. And just for clarification, if my assumption is if we don't approve this shift of money from this fund into the general fund, then we are left with using fund balance in the general fund to cover the gap.
Unless directed otherwise, yes.
Well, that's all that this vote can do right now. It would be that assumption.
All right. So with that, 1, 2, 3. And I see 1, 2, 4 in favor, 3 against. We will add that to the baseline. Reducing human resources training budget by $20,000. We talked about this a little bit last time. Does anyone on council have any questions about this item before we take a vote on it? Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but this is, like I said, these are mixed, so we're actually looking at a true expenditure reduction. And I do know, I have no doubt, I haven't seen the list, you talked about a 4% cut, and this was on the list, like, you know what, this is where we can cut something. You know, we would prefer to do this, but we've got to come up with something. So that's the way I want to read it, at least, whether or not it was actually transmitted that way or not, I don't know. But I do appreciate, this is the type of harder look that I was hoping to see more of across the board. But so I'm in favor of this. This is truly an expenditure reduction. And I guess I do have one question is, would we be considering this one time or ongoing? This would be back in the baseline for 2021?
This would be an ongoing reduction.
Thank you.
Other questions? No.
Yeah, I'm just looking up there.
All right, so a affirmative vote would be to reduce the human resources training budget by $20,000, putting that money back into the ending fund balance. A vote of no would be to not reduce the human resources training budget. 1, 2, 3. 7 yeses. Next, we're on to one that we've already had a little bit of conversation about, allocate court costs to school zone safety fund. And can you just restate how this one is different and how it's an ongoing?
Yes, so there's ongoing revenue from the traffic enforcement cameras coming in that is in excess of what is currently allocated. So that ongoing revenue stream is expected to be sufficient to cover these costs on an ongoing basis.
Questions? No. All right. So a yes vote would be to allocate these court costs to school zone safety fund. This would result in an increase of $46,000, roughly, to the ending fund balance, or at the end of the year. A vote no would be to not do that allocation and not see that additional revenue. Oh, Councilmember Winterstein.
Sorry, just for clarifications, and I want my thinking to just be available for everybody to understand or agree or disagree with. But this, rather than a simple shift, to me, this is one, this is in line with policy and intent in a more accurate way to fund these operations as opposed to out of the general fund. Strictly out of that is the administration is making a proposal that says that those funds from school safety are in alignment with policy and past practice, and it's appropriate to be using them this way. That's why it's ongoing. That's how I'm interpreting that.
Councilmember Goodman.
Is there an argument to not do this? Because it eats into the money that's available for doing projects, and since we're allocating more than we have before, refresh my memory why it's a good idea to do this.
Let me start while Beth's getting the numbers. It's an allowable expense. Again, the exercise was to help balance the budget. We felt that the number was appropriate given the amount of revenue that we're bringing in, and so that's why we made the recommendation. And Beth can give you more details on the numbers.
So the ending fund balance for the fund is expected to be $1.7 million in year-end 2020. The expenditures are about $1 million ongoing expenditures, so this would add $46,000, so it would increase the ongoing expenditures from $1,080,000 to about $1.12 million, and we would still have a $1.7 million fund balance.
And so maybe you said this in a prior meeting, and I just don't remember. But how did we figure out that we should allocate an extra $46,000?
So it's all related to the processing of the fines, the tickets, and as the number of tickets have increased, the percentage of time that municipal court staff is spending to process those tickets has increased. And so this is aligning, we're already transferring funds to support those costs, but as we looked at the workload, it has grown in excess of what is being transferred. So this is aligning that transfer with the actual workload.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I've already said what the pro and con effect is here. So on 3, 1, 2, 3. 7 up, as they say. With that, we will move on to eliminate court merchant fees by shifting costs to customer via N-Court.
To answer any questions, it would be shifting the costs for the merchant fees. The software has the ability to do it easily.
Are there any questions? Oh, Councilmember Walsh.
I highly support this idea, the idea that the cost should be associated with the person that is creating them, and I hope that we will continue to look at our merchant fees as a way that, so that they are not spread across the taxpayer, but rather associated with the specific use.
Councilmember Winterstein.
I look at this as new revenue. It's not shifting from another fund. It's, we're going to charge our customers. We're going to add the merchant fee, the transaction fee to the court customers. So it truly is new revenue. It's not a lot, but boy, I'm really glad you did that exercise, find it, because this was out there. And I know, and so later on, we're going to talk about a couple which are just corrections, but this is in that class of, my gosh, we kicked a few more tires, we turned over a few more stones. So I wish the amount was higher, but I'm going to support it as well.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, a vote of yes would be to do as instructed, to eliminate court merchant fees by shifting costs to customer via end court, would add $5,000 to the ending fund balance at the end of 2020. All in favor? Oh, sorry. 1, 2, 3. 7 up. Now, transfer additional balance from E911 escrow account, $100,000 one time. We've talked about this a little bit. Councilmember Walsh?
I have a hard time with this considering the memo or email that we had gotten detailing that there were going to be additional costs shifted to the city from, I believe, the county related to staffing. Coming up in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And so I have a hard time looking at taking a emergency-related fund, a public safety-related fund, and decreasing it and moving it to the general fund when we have that coming up in our future.
This sounds like a phone a friend for the chief.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember. Regarding the 911 escrow fund, the $100,000 to be transferred is to be used for salaries currently for the 2020 year for dispatchers. Yes, in 2021, we are anticipating potentially a change of the grant funding for the IT 911 GIS position. And that is something that we do have a balance of $190,000 or around $180,000 after, if this is approved within the escrow fund. Plus, there could be a change in 911 escrow funding in 2021 as well. Those are ongoing conversations regionally currently about how escrow funding will be distributed amongst the PSAPs.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, but it does not decrease my concern.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Other questions on this one? Councilmember Winterstein.
I direct you to page 17 of the budget document. What is the 911 escrow account? Is that a separate fund? Because it's not listed as a fund. So what is this source? It's not in our budget.
Sorry, it's not a separate fund. They are, they're dollars that are accounted for in the general fund. Oh, sorry. Hang on, we need to get back to you on that. It's not you're not going to see it on page 17 as a stand-up, but let me.
So, but it's some funds from some known source, and they go into a certain fund, and they're earmarked as 911 escrow.
Correct. I think maybe the friend's going to save the day again.
Chief Beerbaum again.
Again, Chief Beerbaum with the Police Department on that. individual question. 911 escrow funds are designated by the county, and they're maintained by the county. They're released to the city upon request. So it's held in an escrow account by King County. So it's not in our general fund. When we transfer them over for utilization, they do come into our general funds as kind of a reimbursement.
Okay, so this line item is to make a request to King County to pull something out of escrow
Correct.
that they're holding for us anyway.
For allowable expenses. And so that's the other important
Of course.
point, is that this is for an allowable expense, and that is to help fund dispatchers, which is currently the general fund. So that's how that $100,000 would be spent. We can't spend it on anything. It has to be specific purposes.
Right, and because it's labeled as one time, what the administration is saying, our plan going into 2021 is that this would not be in the baseline. We would try to fund dispatch services per, traditionally we funded them general fund.
That's correct.
Councilmember Ray.
Do we know what the escrow balance is with King County in this account?
Sure, it's approximately $491,000 currently, but there had been a document provided earlier in this process, and after this drawdown, it'll be approximately $180,000 with all the other expenses that are occurring as well.
Got it, thank you.
All right, other questions or comments before we consider this line item? Not seeing any. So a thumbs up would be to request King County to transfer $100,000 additional dollars from our E911 escrow account, and that would go into the general fund to the tune of $100,000. A thumbs down would be to not request that and to leave that money in the E911 escrow account. Sorry, Councilmember Hunt, do you have a question? No, okay. Sorry. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 5 yeses, 2 nos. So we will add that to the baseline. Next, we have increased revenue by offering more swimming lessons to address waiting list. And this is called a net of expenditure impact. A different classification than our others. Do you want to explain that to us a little bit?
Yes, so expanding the number of swimming lessons will require additional part-time staff to actually run the swimming lessons. So the Parks Department anticipates that expenditure to be about $5,000, meaning the total revenue collected would be $57,000, but when you back out the expenses, the net to the general fund would be the $52,000 reflected here.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember? Nope. Yes? Nope. Nobody has any other questions right now? Yeah. Oh, Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah. No, you don't. Well, let me. I'm back to the city administrator saying, "Okay, everybody, find me. We got to find 4%." And this type of stuff is just kind of, well, we can always. I mean, it just begs the question, like, because that margin is, my gosh, if you can spend 5 and get 52, boy, you got any more of those sitting around? I mean, that's an amazing thing. So this is the first I've heard. This is the first in my entire career I've never heard. You know what? We can just spend 5 more and get 52,000 more in revenue. Pretty unique.
Jeff Watling, Parks and Recreation Director. So yeah, this is a unique opportunity, and I think one that we weren't hiding this. Zach Leeson and the pool staff have done a great job. About a year and a half ago, we modified our lesson program. When we submit our budget to the mayor's office in the spring, we projected 2020 revenues and swim lessons to be at this amount, this volume. As we now went through the summer and saw an amazing growth in lessons, a huge wait list, we've seen that extended into the fall. We realized, you know what, we have an opportunity to maximize that pool time. So rather than creating new pool out or new hours for lessons, if we're at that critical mass point where let's hire 2 more instructors, let's create 2 more lessons going on in the same body of water in the same amount of time, and we can start to see this type of revenue growth when you multiply that over the year.
Okay, and I think you said, or meant to imply too, that we can't say, hey, let's spend 10 and get 100 because we have a resource capacity limit we're at, and that is lane hours.
Correct. It's lane hours and time, knowing that pool supports 3 high schools. We see this as an opportunity to maximize those swim lesson hours by getting some more instructors in the water.
Additional questions or comments before we thumbs up or thumbs down this one? All right. So a thumbs up would be to do the plan just described by Director Watling with adding additional swim staff and additional swim lessons estimated to increase the ending fund balance to $52,000 next year. A thumbs down would be to not implement that plan. 1, 2, 3. And 7 up. Thank you. Next, we have reduced DSD transfer to the IT fund in 2019, a one-time $200,000. Questions? Councilmember Winterstein.
Again, I'm going back and just can imagine, okay, find me 4%. Oh, you know what? We need to make some corrections. And I appreciate we have a memo. It's already been explained, or it's in this document. Like, we were double counting here, where there was already, we did not need to do this transfer, or I'm going to get this probably flipped around. But this is simply a correction. This is not a reduction in expenses. This is a correction to the accounting that we had.
That's correct, and we came upon it actually separate from the reduction exercise. It was something, we got a question from council about the extent to which permit fees were covering DSD costs, and as we were digging into the line items of DSD, we identified that this was something that was missed in 2019, and the miss was carried forward in the 2020 proposed, because as we were looking at past practice, we just continued past practice, not realizing until we dug in to answer that question that this was an overreach of the general fund for costs that were being covered by the DSD fees.
All right, thank you. And in a bit, we're going to talk about some others. I mean, I characterize this as a correction. I think the very next one we're going to look at as well is it's the similar correction. And then we're also then going to look at the one that's the salary, reduced support services salary. That's kind of a correction. Oops, got that corrected. And then there's that last one, which is capture remaining EFR savings. Oh, that was actually already coming. We just forgot to account for it.
That one's different. That we got a final number from EFR.
Okay, so that's like an update correction.
That was an update.
It's an update, okay.
But I guess the other thing I would add, it is not uncommon to have corrections to a proposed budget.
Right.
And every jurisdiction I've worked in, there is towards the end an update of, look, we've identified these corrections. And this is actually a fairly small number given the complexity of this budget.
Okay, and thank you. But the purpose for my comment is there's 4 items up here which total $449,000. When, okay, we have $1 million gap. Whether 3 of them are corrections and 1 is like an update, none of these really represent like a new revenue or reduced expenses. All we did was just correct our accounting or get an update to a number that we had in this case for the EFR savings. So I just think it's important that we just accurately understand what this has been. We didn't. No big sacrifice was made here. We just corrected some stuff, and we got $449,000 out of it.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
So I'm comfortable with the characterization that line 49, which is the 2020 amount, to basically no longer in the future spend or do the DSD transfer to IT fund of $150,000. I think that makes absolute sense. That is indeed saying, oh, we shouldn't have done this and we're not going to do it in the future. My concern is when we look at the budget as an overall and look at line 46, which is a one-time transfer from E911 escrow, and then also if we consider line 48, both of those are one-time, and that means that for us, looking ahead to next year, we're basically going to have to come up with, we're setting ourselves up to say, we're going to have to come up with $300,000 of either additional revenue or additional cuts in the next year. And that puts me in a really uncomfortable place.
So let me offer a way to think about this. This raft of proposals to $956,000 is there primarily because the administration is attempting to account for an expected 6% moving to 4% or 3.5% on the utility tax, right? Although it hasn't been formally said so, there seems to be some expectation, at least among some council members, that that would be a stepped function and that it would be going to those as a step towards the 6%. And if you view it that way, and I'm on record of saying I would rather have 0% utility tax, but if one believes that this is a step to 3.5% or 4% on your way to 6%, then it is a one-time amount. And therefore, that $711,000 that they've got notionally in there, that is a one-time charge, and this is a one-time compensation to that one-time charge, if you accept all those things as predicate.
Yes, and my approach is setting ourselves up to have to make two sets of decisions next year is, I would rather make one set of decisions now.
Okay, but just understand, it came from the hearing that council doesn't want to go straight to 6%. Oh my gosh, you got to go to an intermediate step. This is a way, amongst several others, to potentially address that. Councilmember Winterstein.
I view it a little bit different than that. I think the explanation that accompanied this was that the funds that were being collected were going already, that should have been allocated toward these DSD costs or revenue from them is already been accounted for in the IT fund. They were also saying, well, now let's transfer money out of the general fund and then put also that into the IT fund. We were double paying for what DSD should have really, by formula, have the rights to. So this is saying stop double paying. So it doesn't reflect an inability to do IT-related work for DSD in the future at all. It's just we're not double paying it anymore. And so what I look at this is, let's kind of back out. We double paid in 2019. IT fund has too much in there. So let's correct our budget plan for 2020, and let's not put that 150 in there because it's already in that fund.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
And I get that. I'm not concerned about the IT fund's ability to continue doing what it's doing. I'm just trying to look ahead at how we create a balanced budget next year. And anytime we are setting out a one-time transfer is setting ourselves up for something that we have to cover next year. And I don't like the position that puts us in, is all I'm stating.
Other comments or questions? All right, so the thumbs up or thumbs down on this. Thumbs up is reduced DSD transfer to the IT fund by the tune of $200,000, which would leave us $200,000 more at the end of the year in the general fund. Thumbs down would be to not reduce the transfer, keep it at the higher level, and not see that increase ending fund balance at the end of next year. So with that, shall we do 1, 2, 3? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 in favor, 1 opposed. a not dissimilar item. Do you want to explain the difference between the 2020 suggestion and the 2019 suggestion?
Yes, so, and actually, Councilmember Winterstein, I explained it very well just a moment ago, which is on an ongoing basis, we're anticipating about $150,000 in these fees that would cover the IT costs. So we're correcting for that on an ongoing basis moving forward. The one-time element, the $200,000, is saying there was a double transfer in 2019 that we also don't need. Let's capture that. And that's only one time because since we're correcting it separately on an ongoing basis, you've got to separate that out and look at the 2019 as one time.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councilmember Winterstein.
Just to keep in the theme, so going forward, the baseline for DSD charges and for 2021 will not have this money in it anymore because it's in there now out of the general fund.
Correct,
Nope,
the general
no
fund
need to do
transfer.
that because that money's already going into IT. All right,
Correct.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Nope. All right. Thumbs up would be reduce DSD transfer to the IT fund by $150,000 starting in 2020, which would leave an ending fund balance increased by $150,000. A vote no would be to not do that. 1, 2, 3. 7 up. Next, reduce support services salary technical change too high in proposed. Slightly cryptic language. Would you like to explain?
This was a technical error that we found as we were going through the budget. A salary for one of the positions was allocated too high, so we are recommending that we capture that savings.
Gotcha. Thank you. Any questions? Nope. All right, so to accept the revision representing the identified earlier incorrect number to the tune of adding increasing the ending fund by $22,000. 1, 2, 3. 7 up. Thank you. Capture remaining EFR savings.
Again, the original dollar that we received from the district was a preliminary number. The final number is 77,000 additional for that true-up.
How nice that all these revised numbers have been to our benefit.
And that doesn't happen often, so we'll take it when we can.
Use your mic. All right. Little chatter from our awesome EFR reps. Any questions? No. All right. Revisions to EFR funding to the tune of $77,000. 1, 2, 3. 7 up. All right. I got to come up with a different phrase than 7 up. Last in this category is also the numerically largest one, 1% underspend on personnel costs. You did spend some time last time explaining that to us. If you want to take 20 seconds to refresh our memory.
We never spend 100% of our personnel costs for a variety of different reasons. We'll have us budget 99% of those costs to reflect that. We will probably usually would be 97 or 98%, but budgeting 99 is prudent, and then taking that savings to help balance the budget.
Debate? No? 1%, assuming 99% spend would add $262,000 at the end of the year. All in favor, or 1, 2, 3. 7 up. All right. So taking stock of where we're at, we have one more item under new council requests. And then we will address the question of utility tax after we see how everything else sort of adds up. So who wants to talk about add back funding for contracts for service? Councilmember Hunt?
This was a change that I had proposed last time. In in keeping with using the assessment of city services to best understand how we can provide services for the city, and this year sort of maintaining current levels of service pending that information. So there was some information that was provided in an email about which specific organizations this was affecting, and I did have one follow-up question, which is, these are all nonprofits that are in the contracts for service, is that correct? Including the chamber?
I believe so, but let me, oops, sorry. I believe so, but let us just confirm by pulling up that information.
Not all tax exempt nonprofits, I don't believe they're all tax exempt. They're different 501Cs. I don't think they're all C3s, if that matters to you.
Do you want me to just list what they are? Would that be easy?
I actually have the list. I just wanted to make sure because there's the community services ones, which I'm familiar with those organizations, Issaquah Alps Trails Club, Friends of Lake Sammamish State Park, and then there are some other non-departmental ones. And so I just wanted to confirm that these are all nonprofits that we have contracts for service with. None of them are for-profit.
By looking at them, they don't appear to be, but we would.
None of them are for-profit. This chamber is probably a C6. I don't know that for a fact, which means they're not tax exempt, but they would be a nonprofit.
So, Councilmember Hunt, are you going to move this proposed revision?
Yes, so I would like to propose adding back this funding for contracts for service.
All right. Discussion. Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. I've been keeping a running tally, and I know we're going to have a vote on this. This amount, $26,854, along with others that we've already voted on, including restoring the community fund for nearly $70,000, restoring the hours for the community center and the pool for another $25,000, for the additional resources for Title 18 for $50, and this one for $26. The council's net amount of expenditure increases that were asked for would total up to $171,629. Just so you know, the total amount of expenditure decreases that we asked for totaled up to $56,000. So the council in this budget process, with this last one we're going to vote on here, basically our net changes are an increase of $115,000. Just want everybody to be aware of those numbers.
Thank you. Other questions on this one? Nope. All right. So a thumbs up would be to add back funding for contracts for service. This would have a net effect of reducing ending fund balance by $26,900. A vote of no would be to not add back funding for contracts for service and to not impact ending fund balance. 1, 2, 3. 6-1 in favor. Now, so we see there $709,263, that little green line on the lower right-hand corner. Wouldn't that be awesome if we had saved $709,262 and I'm carrying the pennies, 56 cents. However, this assumes 6% utility tax. Yes, it does. The column C doesn't, but column G at the moment does. So if that were to move to, let's say, 4%, then it looks like what you've got on the left there, and then you now have a net impact in the lower corner of 700 somethings. Sorry, you went to 4%? Yeah, I'm just looking at the The 709 number at the bottom, why didn't that change?
I didn't update the 711 at the time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it would basically be a wash if
Yeah,
you,
it'd be $1,844. So it'd be a complete blank if you went to 4%. If you went to 3.5%, I prorated it. That number down in the lower corner now goes to negative $180,000, negative $180,000. And if you go to 0%, the net is negative $1,424,000. So that is the question in front of us. We are at 6% right now. Does someone wish to propose an alternate amount other than 6% utility tax? Councilmember Ray.
Can we see what 3% would do to us in terms of impact on the ending fund balance?
every 1% is $362,000, every 0.5% is $181,000. So if you went to 3%, it'd be a $1,070,000-ish.
Let's put it in.
So for 3%, yeah, I get, yeah, $1,067,000 prorated. It's four-thirds of that number. It's four-thirds of that number there, which is one. The net, Chris, in the
Yeah, what's the bottom line?
bottom line is $360,000 in the hole, $357,000 in the hole.
264.
I'm sorry. So
Or 3%?
if we went to 3% utility tax, the net effect of all these pieces on the ending fund balance is $357,000. In the little gap. Oh, 364. You say tomato, I say tomato. So, do I have a proposal? Oh, Councilmember Winterstein next?
Yeah, I 3%, you're right, 364,007. And if we think about, now what we should be doing is looking at what expenses that we have proposed that are in this budget and that we've either added to it, that we really view as one time. So that's this consistent with which we've always done. As long as I've been on the council, like if we're going to spend down the fund balance, is it offset by one-time expenditures? Is there alignment? Because that would be consistent with not past practice and policy as well. Because what we're trying to avoid is using the one-time funds for ongoing expenditures. So certainly the assessment of city services at $250,000 is one time. What I don't have in front of me is a full accounting of all of the one-time expenses. However, what we've done tonight, there's some more that contribute to that. The additional resources for Title 18, which is another 50, so we're up to 300,000 in one time. And that's really the only one that I'm aware of. So so that is still, pretty consistent. That's a 64,000 dip into ending fund balance between those two at one time. And so if you've got more, boy, I can tell you're waiting to tell me something.
I got more.
Okay, we are still at the point where we're looking for additions and subtractions and modifications, right? You're moving towards making a motion, making a proposed addition or subtraction?
Well, there was. I'm sorry. It was a question. I thought the question was where we got an answer about what 3% looks like instead of 4%. And I just explained the net of that number and also its effect and alignment between use of ending fund balance and one-time expenses. So you're right, I went beyond that, but that is part of my calculus, part of my assessment when I look at a proposal.
The reason I threw 3% out there is I was doing a calculus very similar to Councilmember Winterstein. I was trying to figure out what do we have in one-time expenses that we could, being consistent with past policy, use a reduction in fund balance to fund. And so I kind of got the sense that, Beth, you had some other things that you were going to bring to that calculus too, which would be good to understand, because if that becomes a bigger number of one-time expenses, then I'm open to a larger or a smaller increase in utility tax.
So, there are other one-time expenses. In terms of the citywide service assessment, that's already factored into the 364 you're seeing up there. So we can't count that one again, but we talked earlier this evening, I think Councilmember Ray, you were the one that brought it up, of the one-time costs for the Title 18 update. That is one-time costs. In addition, there's some professional services dollars in the finance department budget, $200,000, part of the Munis reboot that is general fund one-time, that could be, taking the philosophy of put one-time costs on one-time dollars. There's $200,000 there. And then there's $75,000 in the executive department budget that is for the Transportation Benefit District, public engagement, and if the council decides to put something on the ballot next year, those costs. So between Title 18, Finance Department, and TBD, you've got $325,000.
Council, did you have your? Yes. Your mic is not. Council Deputy President Batiste.
So with the professional services for Munis, the suggestion was that would be a one-time cost, so it would still happen, it would just come out of the general fund.
Correct. So basically, when it came to 2021, it would be a wash because the expenditure would go away and you've already used the fund balance, so there wouldn't be an ongoing impact.
Got it.
So,
I have one more question.
Another question?
Yes. So I apologize, this might be coming out of left field just a little bit, but it just occurred to me. So when I look at line number 52, which was the 1% underspend on personnel costs, and you talked a bit about being trying to give that a lower number, even though typically it would be a bit higher. Is there a way, or could we get like a number for if that went to 1.5%?
You could do that. I think one of the things that it's important to talk about here is that we have an underspend every year, but we don't budget for it. And so that underspend provides flexibility in that year. And so there are 100 different things that can happen during the course of the year. Having that in your hip pocket is a good thing, I think. As much as you budget this underspend, that's money that's kind of gone forever then. And so we were reluctant. I mean, Beth and I have done this other places. I've seen 2%, I've seen 2.5%, but that takes away that flexibility. So kind of looking at this as a larger package, I think we both felt with the experience we have that 1% was safe, knowing that the underspend probably is a little bit more than that, but then you have that in your hip pocket for the following year. So it's a policy decision for the council ultimately. Our best professional judgment with everything else that's up there was that 1% was prudent.
Okay, so I've dealt with that as well. So 1% was sort of that area where you felt like you could do that and you felt comfortable, but going even 0.5% above that would would take away some flexibility.
Exactly, and I think while we have made, the staff, I have done very little, the staff has made tremendous efforts this last year to get the budget right. As you even have heard tonight, there are still things we're finding. And so I would caution giving yourselves as much flexibility as you reasonably can. And as I think Council President Martz has said the last several meetings, we would get to this point right now where you kind of have to take a step back and look at the picture that you've painted. And so part of that is looking to the future and how much flexibility do you want to spend with this budget? How much do you want to leave for future budgets? How much do you want to tax? You kind of now have to kind of step back and look at the full picture.
Councilmember Walsh.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand this concept of one-time expenses and how they relate to this gap. Because earlier, Council President Martz was talking about, okay, well, you've got those one-time transfers in that kind of match the potentially discussed about increase from 4% to 6%, but now we're talking about one-time expenses that wouldn't be there. So how does the math work out? If I was to say, you know, we do 3% this year and I want to make sure that our inputs and outputs are even going into a future year, how, it's hard for me to look at it because the 250 we've already said is coming out of fund balance, and yeah, I'm trying to figure that out and I don't know how to do it.
So let me try this out. The council has deliberated a series of decisions and has come down to the end or nearly the end, and has decided or is considering deciding a utility tax revenue that would not bring, at a lower rate, would not bring in enough revenue on, to balance the budget. And so is making a decision, are we comfortable, is the council comfortable dipping in to fund balance? In this scenario now, $364,000. And what I believe the council is debating right now is, is the council comfortable dipping into fund balance to that extent? And council members, I believe some council members are saying that we know there are one-time expenses in the budget that are going to go away in 2021, and so would not represent an ongoing drag on the budget, and so you'd use ongoing one-time dollars in fund balance to support them. Does that help clarify?
And I get that, but trying to do the math on that, if the 250 is already taken out from that bottom line number, then looking at the other one-time items there, we've got line 16, which is Consolidated City Hall, which is a decreased one-time expenditure, but then we've got the additions to Title 18, which is then the opposite, right?
Yeah, so the things that I listed are actually not on this list. Title 18 is. The other things that I listed are things that are in the proposed budget that aren't on the deliberation list because council hadn't raised them. So that just through my familiarity with the budget and, was playing with the numbers, know that those are definitely one-times. So as council is thinking about, are they comfortable dipping into fund balance by 300 some odd thousand or whatever the amount is, I can offer up some one-time expenditures that would be roughly on par with that amount of money.
Thank you.
Councilmember Goodman.
So one of the items that you mentioned as a one-time was the $200,000 professional fees for the munis. So I'm wondering if we moved that to one-time and out of fund balance and then revisited the traffic engineer. Those two together are $384. And then it means that the administration has to make an even more robust presentation to the council in order to get us to fund traffic engineer position next year, but it doesn't look like we're ready to spend that now anyway. So doesn't that?
It doesn't, I'm sorry,
Does
it doesn't look like we're
not ready to spend it now anyway.
I'm concerned because we had said what we wanted to do is we wanted to go through line by line, and then we wanted to talk about utility tax. And I think what we've done is decide to go back and iterate on the stuff that we had notionally decided before trying to tackle utility tax, right? We're still at 6% on utility tax right now, right?
So what's the 380, what's the 300?
That would be if we went to 3%, which
Right.
we haven't decided. It was just, Chris asked the question.
Oh, I thought we were talking about how to close that.
No,
300.
right at the moment, we're at 6%. If Chris wants to make a motion to go to 3%, or make a suggestion to go to 3%, we can debate the merits on that, or we can get additional information that would make people feel more comfortable addressing. But I'm going to let Chris respond.
I like a 3% tax, and the reason that I like it is I've approached all of these discussions with a couple of basic tenets. And one of those tenets was I don't want to kick a can down the road. So if we're going to be funding something that's an ongoing expense, I want to make sure that we have a revenue stream to support that next year when we have this discussion. If we have something that is going to be a one-time expense, the second tenet is we actually are fairly healthy ending fund balance in the general fund right now. So we have some flexibility in the savings account, if you will, to pick up some of these one-time car repairs. By way of analogy. So I don't want to talk about the fleet fund thing because that would just get confusing. But those are the two things that I've been looking at. And so how do we accomplish those goals of not giving ourselves a hole to dig out of next year if things don't get better, because things could get worse? And how do we take advantage of the fact that we do have some additional funds in our ending fund balance to fund some of these, and then come to a utility tax rate, which is the lowest that accomplishes those other two. So that's why I kind of threw out the 3%, because it looked like it was going to be around the number that our one-time expenditures seem to be coming in at. So that's why I think that's the right way to go if you buy into my two previous tenets.
Got it. Councilmember Winterstein. So, I'm sorry, are you proposing 3%?
I am proposing 3%.
Okay, so 3% is the proposed modification to go from 6% to 3%, and that's what we're discussing. Councilmember Winterstein.
With all those arguments, I think we actually have more to work with. Because with all due respect, I absolutely align with the 364,007. But that's a simple accounting of what's the beginning fund balance that we're forecasting, and it's a simple accounting of net changes of revenue, which some of them are corrections, some of them are shifts, some of them are new revenues, and net changes in expenditures. We've added some new ones, we've taken some out, and some of those are actually corrections as well. So the 250 for city assessment, it's part of the original expense line, and it remains part of the original expense line. It's not part of a net change. And I still get with the 364,007 as it stands right now, representing how much our expenditures exceed revenues. So that's why I want to continue to, I think it's in fairness to continue to include that assessment in the amount of one-time costs. So you mentioned professional fees, you mentioned consolidation of City Hall. What was the 75,000 again?
The cost in the executive department budget related to the transportation benefit district package engagement, and then election costs.
Okay, all right, thank you. And when I add those up, including the 250, that's 575 of one-time expenses. And as currently cast, we would be dipping in for 364,007. So there's still 210,000, almost 211,000 in of one-time costs that we are paying for just out of kind of the regular, the ongoing revenue. So I think that affords us, per the objective of trying to align this, the utility fees to minimize them, then I think we can go even below 3% in terms of total taxes. And even if we went down another, to 2%, we're still only looking at dipping into ending fund balance of about 150,000. And even that's not very painful because, again, the policy has been, it was stated earlier and a couple times, and it's been repeated, and I really love the fact that it's well understood that what we try to do is not have our ongoing expenditures exceed our regular revenues. And yet there are times, and I believe this is one of those times because of changes in the economy and there's some real fundamentals that are changing our revenue mix and that's driven by forces that we can't control. So we have this healthy balance. And we always said that, and I think this is captured in our policies as well, that there are times when we may want to use some of that balance to get us through what might be a period of time, and so that we don't have to make more cuts. Or in this case, my argument is to not raise taxes as much. And so we don't really know how long this is going to go. And I would be in favor of using even more fund balance to lower even further the additional tax burden we're putting on the citizens.
Can I just offer a technical thing to a comment that you made about the 250 not being counted? The way this is set up in here is it's pulling the 250 out. So if you look at cell C68 and then similarly G68, it's referring up to cell C14, which is where the one-time services are counted. So the 364 is the net of that, and that doesn't take away from your overall statement, but I wanted to just clarify that the 250 is in fact already being accounted for.
Yeah, I get, all I'm saying is I still don't completely understand it because I just have a very simple adding and subtracting of numbers, and we come up with the same number, and so when I add up what we identified as one-time costs, I'm still adding the assessment of city services into that. So but that's important because that says I think we can go even further on reducing the tax increase.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
I had put forward that I would support a 3% tax. Last budget deliberation, I'm still in favor of that. None of the information and the deliberations since then have made me change my mind on that. So I think it's more gradual than going directly to a 6%. I think we've found a number of things we can do differently. We'll have to make more hard decisions in the future next year. But in the meantime, I don't think we should go directly to the state allowed maximum. I think we should make a more gradual change, and 3% seems like a more gradual change to me, and it will, and I think it will also, then we can work with the community over this next year to balance the budget and see how we can continue to provide services. So I'm in favor of the 3%, and I think that's what's on the table currently, and that's why I'll be supporting this.
Councilmember Walsh.
So my concern is always trying to make sure that we are fiscally responsible, and by that meaning the money that's coming in, or the money that's going out, is not more than the money that's coming in. So very similar to what Councilmember Ray said. I approach the utility tax as a concept of, this is something that we haven't looked at in a long time, that we've seen decreasing revenues there because of ways that people are using utilities differently. And if we had kept up with this over the last 10 years, we would not have seen so much of a utility tax decrease. So I agree with the idea of moving toward more of a utility tax. And I think the 6% is in line with other communities and should be our goal going forward. But I also appreciate the idea of taking a stepped approach. And so I am comfortable somewhere between 3 and 4%. But I think we need to have a robust conversation going into next year.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
I would support 3% and also hope we have another discussion next year about the need to raise it further.
Thank you. Council Deputy President Batiste.
So similarly, I had talked about 3% in the past. I don't take this lightly, and I'm still thinking about how we could even do maybe even a little bit lower. The 6%, when we look across the other jurisdictions and look at what other cities are doing, it makes sense that we've got to make some changes, and I don't think that we can do that all at once, and I would like to see a staggered approach for sure. I could take a look at 3%, but we were talking just a moment ago, Councilmember Winterstein brought up even 2.5%, and I think if there's any sort of movement and even taking an amount out of the general fund, I would be supportive of that. Right now, I'm sort of in this 3% category, but I would like to continue in here if we have other ideas in regard to going just a little bit lower.
So I think everybody except for me has been through at least once. I am going to oppose this. I believe we should go to 0. And the reason I believe we should go to 0, as I've said before, city's fiscal policy section 2.2 says the general fund unassigned fund balance should be approximately 15 to 20% of expenditures of the general fund. There are many ways to define fiscal prudence. I agree that having sustained revenues match sustained expenditures is one way, but we have perennially, for all 10 years that I've been on council, we have been above the targeted general fund reserve, and implementing this utility tax when we sit so far above our stated financial policy bothers me. So that's why I want to go to 0. Councilmember Winterstein, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I did. I wish I had better numbers and a way to represent them pictorially. As you've noticed before, I've commented how I've tried to understand what fundamental change has been happening that is outside of our control, but we just try to really understand why have we seen such a lessening of tax or revenue? And if you just look at construction itself, we've seen, the information has been presented that we had some really high points in 2015, 16, 17. We started to see it 18, it went down a little, much lower now in 19, and projected even lower for 2020. That just the property tax at one time for new construction, those dollars reduction and those estimate values reflect less economic activity in in construction. We have information as well that was provided by, then I don't have all the numbers here, but we've similarly seen, if we do get sales tax information by category, and we've similarly seen a reduction in sales tax revenues from the construction sector. So again, whereas we had some pretty high numbers in years past, those fundamentals are changing. Now, this is where it gets a little bit difficult because I want to make sure it's a valid comparison, but I did ask for a little bit of information, like how many entities or might be involved with that revenue that's associated with new property values and sales tax on those. And we also get revenue, actually the categorical biggest category where there's a reduction in revenue is what we have from less revenue from for permits and inspections. That in the last few years has been around, just in terms of permits, 2,300, about 2,000 for this year. Now, there's not really a one-to-one correlation between those numbers and how much revenue, but it gives you an idea of how much activity, how many entities are involved with doing something that's construction related, about 2,000. For water customers, we have 8,620 customers. So when we look at and we think to ourselves, hey, we want to look at other tools, and a tax on these utilities is one that we could use. I am seeing this through the lens that this fundamental shift and reduction of revenue, which the last few years has been coming, one of the major contributions and the major reductions has been through construction activity, and that is paid for by a certain segment of the population. In this case, there's some kind of development, whether it be a home improvement or a new construction of an office building. That is economic activity of the type that generates revenue in many different ways, jobs and elsewise. So these things are shifting, and we're saying with a utility tax that population that whose revenue we were dependent upon, we want to shift that and get that revenue now from our water customers. Of course, they have sewer and stormwater as well, and they may be cable customers. And I rather than doing that, because I don't think that's fair, I think we should be doing exactly what Councilmember Mart said, is we should not be doing any utility tax right now. We should take, this, one of the reasons we have such a large balance in the fund to even work with is because our estimates of costs, as we've learned, and I really appreciate the transparency and the clarity and the better information that we have now. You've done a lot to true up the way we've been estimating our expenses, and I think that's been a very honest and welcome change that we've made. But we have high revenue there in balance because we were overestimating our costs, and then we were matching our funds to do that. And so that money that's sitting in that account it has been our B&O taxpayers, it's been sales taxpayers, it's been property taxes. We've kind of collected in advance almost some of this, or allocated it against expenses that we didn't even have. We maybe didn't have to increase property tax as much as we did because our expenses really weren't as high as they were. So because of this shifting the state of change that we have right now, and because we are mostly trying to make up this difference from our water utility customers, and for a rough estimate, back of the napkin estimate of a total amount per household, which would be very equivalent with each household would pay if we were to do a 0.2% increase in sales tax for transportation. That you're one of them we would say we have to do a vote and get people to chime in on. This is one that we as a council would simply impose on each household with just the tax increases itself. So for all of those reasons, I'm passionately arguing that my council colleagues consider that for this year, that until there may be new economic numbers, the council's already approved doing assessment of city services, and there can be another truing up right there. But in order not to potentially I think mistakenly, ask our water utility customers to carry this full burden through. I say we do use ending fund balance to get through this year and then economic conditions may change, and we'll have this assessment, which may be making some other recommendations. And I say we try to get through this with no new taxes on the utility at all.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
So I have several disagreements with that concept that's been put out there. But first I want to start, Director Goldberg, with construction costs. I believe you had given us some adjustments to the initial data, which suggested that construction is not down by a huge amount.
It's down, but not down as dramatically as we had thought. And I was over here actually trying to find the slide where the data was, because we're on information overload right now. So in 2020, the revised numbers that we received from the King County Assessor's Office, the assessed value of new construction is $213,000, which is down, $213 million. So this is the total value. And that's down 14% from the 2019 levels, which were actually 5% higher than 2018. 2018 was down 12% from 2017. So it's kind of going up and down. The total amount we're getting from new construction is this year, or for 2020, would be $169,000. Which is down 22% because the tax rate is going down relative to 2019. So the original budget, I believe, had it at $69,000, which we were really concerned about, and then the revised data from the assessor brought it back up, down, but not as dramatic as it first appeared.
Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my first point. The next point, you had said that, we shouldn't shift this idea of revenue that was paid for by one segment of the population, which I assume you're referring to business, onto taxpayers. And I disagree with that assessment for the idea that we had a presentation, gosh, I believe back in April, that talked about how the utility taxes had gone down pretty dramatically over time. And so I disagree with the assessment that we are all of a sudden putting costs back on taxpayers. We're taking a look at something that we hadn't for several years and showing that there was a decline, and we're making up for that. Third, I would say you had represented that DSD costs had decreased, and so I think in that case it was an incorrect revenue estimate and not necessarily lower actual revenues. And then finally, my main point is that general fund balance, in my perspective, should not be used to cover operating expenses. Yes, we do have more than our stated policy sitting in that savings account, and I appreciate that, but from my perspective, that should be used for one-time costs, such as capital costs for transportation projects, which we know our community desperately wants us to do. And so that's the way that I view things. Yeah.
Council Deputy President Batiste. Oh, Councilmember Winterstein.
Some real numbers to look at. I'm going to go back and compare it. We do have actuals from 2017. So, and looking at the difference just between 2017 and what we're forecasting for 2020. So in property tax, we collected $8.6 million. We're forecasting a collection of, I think it's now 9.6 million roughly, so that's increased. Sales tax, we collected in total 14.7 in 2017. We're actually forecasting 15.9. It had gone from 14.7, which was an actual, to a 16.3, which was an actual, and then an estimate for 2019, which is 15.9, and we're being flat across that. B&O tax has actually gone from $5 million in 2017. We're estimating $5.8 million in 2020. Utility tax, we got $4.5 million actual in 2017. We're estimating 4.0, not counting this new sales tax, 4.0. So that's a decrease of $500,000. In the other category, which we don't spend a lot of time talking about, it includes planning and permits and licensing, public safety and enforcement, parks and recreation, cost allocation, miscellaneous, shared intergovernmental, and transfers in. In 2017, we collected $17.9 million. We're forecasting in 2020 to collect 12.7. That's a decrease of $5.2 million. And those are just numbers from the budget book. Those are actuals. And of that, the biggest category of change was in this planning, permits, and licensing area. So those are actual revenue numbers from the years past. It's not a budget. These were actuals that have been reporting in this budget. So it is true to say that one of the very significant areas of reduction is in revenue that we got from among other things, permits.
Thank you. Are there other comments, questions, concerns before we take the up or down? This is to move from the the mayor's modified budget 6% utility tax to a 3% utility tax. Would have an impact of something on the order of $1.073 million, netting out at the end to just up a little bit, $364,007. That's question, Council Deputy President?
Sorry. Beth, is there a way that you could help me understand if we went to 2.5%, if we went down from 3% to 2.5%, and we were taking into account the one-time transfers that you talked about earlier, what amount would we be needing to take from the general fund? And then approximately what percentage would that leave us at in terms of our general fund policy? As if that wasn't the longest question ever. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I'm manipulating Excel while also trying to run a microphone. So if we went down to 2.5%, it would represent a $1.254 million reduction in general fund revenues. And on a bottom line basis, it would take the use of fund balance up to $545,000. And I think part of your question was how much one-time costs can we attribute to it. The ones that I listed earlier are the ones that I know off the top of my head. There may be others within the budget, but I don't have those in my mind right now.
So if we, just for example, if we're at the 545 and we take out the 200,000 for the finance munis and move that over, so then just in terms of, I'm just trying to think of our policy about how much we want to keep in the general fund, and how does that change?
Yes.
How does that impact?
So maybe, and this is not on the file that I sent you last week. It is on the file that's on the screen here. So if you, maybe I could point you to line 71 and 72 on the screen up above. So as Council President Martz indicated, our fund balance policy does say 15 to 20% of expenditures is the target. That would range on the low end using the proposed expenditures to David's online. We had disabled that, but apparently it came back, so I'm sorry, we're getting a little flip here. That would range from a fund balance target to meet the 15 to 20%, 7.5 to just over $10 million. And so if the council were to make a decision to go to 3% or to 2.5% and have an ending fund balance of almost $2 million, it would still be in excess of that 20% target. And so does that?
That helps.
So, I think I've already given the numbers on what we'd be at if we went from 6% to 3%, unless people need me to restate that. Looks like we're ready to take a thumbs up or thumbs down on moving from 6% to 3%. Any last questions before we take that thumbs up, thumbs down? Looks like we're set. 1, 2, 3. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor, 3 opposed. So the ayes have it. So we will add moving to 3% on the utility tax as the proposal going forward. And we are now back to our 007 down there, 364,007. I will entertain additional proposed changes to the budget. There was some, I didn't mean to stifle the conversation we were having before, but now would be the point if you wanted to revisit existing line items.
Wait for the proper prompt. So my only thought was that if we wanted to designate the finance department professional fees for Munis, $200,000 as one time, and then revisit the traffic engineer about whether we want to fund that position or wait. And as we know, things, there's one thing we know, like Beth says, things don't stay the same, so you never know what's going to happen over the course of the next several months, and what kind of bearing that would have on whether we want to fund that position. And it doesn't say no. I think the strong indication from the council right now is that we're very interested in it, and I don't think that that changes things. It just makes the bar a little bit higher to get that position funded next year.
So your proposal is to remove line 35, restore traffic signal engineer, and what was the other half of it?
$200,000 professional fees in the finance department. Is that what you said, Beth? The two, to make it one time?
It is, well, it is one time.
Yeah.
So it's designated as one time. It doesn't, it doesn't require council to make a change. It's just in the ballpark. You're dipping into fund balance by $364,000, and the sum of the $200,000 in the finance department, the $75,000 in the executive department budget for TBD, and the $50,000 for Title 19 are in that ballpark. So it doesn't require any changes. It's just when you back those out as one times, when we start the 2021 budget process, it nets out.
So that's, so are the two things I suggested, if we did that, would it close the gap?
No.
No? Okay.
Well, the traffic engineer, if you unfunded that, that would go partway through, but philosophically, I think, the council should decide, is it comfortable dipping into fund balance by the 364 or not? If there's a comfort level with $364,000, then you don't need to look for additional reductions. If council is comfortable with a dip in $364,000, unless there are additional ads or, things you want to discuss. You could call this good and done, and you got a balanced budget that you could adopt next week, or the 18th. And I'm not eager for that or anything.
So we began the evening saying that we were going to get through utility tax, and we're going to entertain additional potential changes, because it's one thing to talk about a particular line item when we have a nebulous ending fund balance, and now we have a specific number. So I very much want to entertain this option if you want to move forward with consideration of removing the traffic engineer. Do you want to move forward with entertaining that revision? Councilmember Goodman?
Well, I think the question, it would the result would be that it would reduce the 364 by about half.
Right, correct.
And so, it's a topic for discussion, sure.
So you're moving that we make that provision?
Well, I'm not making a motion.
No, well,
It's a
but you're
topic.
proposing.
Yeah, I'd just
proposing
like
a
to know what
change.
people
Yeah.
think about it, because then it means you dip into fund balance for half that amount.
Yep, totally fair. Councilmember Walsh.
Well, if Councilmember Goodman wasn't going to do it, I was, so it's
there you
out
go.
there. I think this was the closest thumbs up, thumbs down that we had of all of the items, and it is an appropriate one to come back to. One of the things that the administration did in order to present the original balanced budget was to leave 7 positions unfunded. This kind of moves that needle back a little bit. And while I think we all want to be responsive to the idea of improving traffic, I just don't feel like this is a solid, well thought through proposal that gives us everything that we need to know about it. And I dislike the general idea of putting out a bucket of money and saying this might go toward some idea, but we're also going to come back and review it and approve it later. I just don't think that's the right approach to things, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
So if I recall, opposed funding this position when we went through it the first time, but I don't understand what has changed that would make us want to revisit this. I mean, we are, from where I sit, within $35,000 of the decrease in ending fund balance is all attributable to one-time costs, and I think that's pretty close from where I sit. So I just don't see any reason to revisit this decision.
All right. Council Deputy President Batiste.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I would like to leave this in to address Councilmember Walsh. I think we at budget time put in piles of money all the time, not knowing exactly what it's going to do. We did it with the dog park a couple of years ago, where we said we're going to put in $100,000 for a dog park. We don't even know where it's going to be, but we know that we have the will to make that financial investment now, and we don't know if we will in 6 months. We'll have other priorities, and so we wanted to put a stake in the ground. And we've had other projects like that, and I really want to see us hire a traffic signal engineer. As I've said, I won't beat it to death. Traffic is our biggest problem here. Let's get a traffic czar and get that person on the problem. And because the administration has been kind enough to say, has agreed to, the council will approve a plan before they spend a nickel of that, I would like to leave it in here, and I'm okay with the ending fund balance being 364,007. Councilmember Hunt.
So I do think it would be appropriate to reduce the ending fund balance. So my argument, though, for why I am going to support having the traffic engineer position be one-time funding is because I'm still not convinced that that is the best use of those funds. I agree that oftentimes it is appropriate to say we have this issue, we think it's going to cost about this much money to do something about it, but I'm not sure that funding this position long-term is the answer, and so I think we need that more information coming forward, which is why I am thinking of it as potentially a one-time fund and a one-time funding, and then we'll get a lot more information about that, plus a lot more long-term costs when it comes forward.
By one-time funding, you mean like a mid-year budget revision when the thing actually comes before us? Because if we approve Council Member Goodman's revision, the position will stay there, but it'll remain unfunded, and to fund it would require a mid-year budget revision. That's what you're supporting.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do support it. I think the end reason why I'm supporting it is because I'm just not convinced that we know exactly what the long-term use of this funding to address our traffic problem looks like, and I don't think we have the information to address that tonight.
Okay. Council Deputy President Batiste.
I am still supportive of leaving that in.
Councilmember Goodman.
Yeah, I think I'm changing my mind a little bit in terms of my support before. And once I look at the numbers, and, there's a lot of talk tonight about one time. Well, there's a lot of, every year there's a whole list of one times. And every year that list is a different list of one times. And I think we need to dip into our ending fund balance less this year, and I don't think that we are, and I don't think we should use it. I'm concerned that we're not cutting as much as we should cut, and I think we are going to have an even bigger job next year. So I'm looking at cutting into the ending fund balance the least amount we can. And I agree with Councilmember Walsh that the one-time expenditures I think should be rare, and they should be for things that are not ongoing items. And like I said, I think we do have a list of one time every year, but it's really a list of one time that's an ongoing list of one time. It's just that the list of those items changes every year. So it's really they're still our operating costs, and so we are dipping into our ending fund balance for operating costs, what I think of our operating costs, even though we can categorize them as one time.
Thank you. Any further comments before we thumbs up or thumbs down? So to be clear, thumbs upping on this proposal is to remove the funding for the traffic signal engineer. This would put $184,000 back into the ending fund, reducing the ending fund deficit number 364 to something like 170. The hour is late, but it's thereabouts. That's what a thumbs up means. A thumbs down means keeping that position funded now. Any other questions? All right. 1, 2, 3. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In favor, 2 opposed, so we will make that revision to the baseline. Are there any other potential changes? Oh, let's see the new number. Like this is like the Jerry Lewis telethon.
Scroll down.
Yeah. All right. I said 170, 180. Like I said, I blame the time. So, Councilmember Winterstein, would you care to?
I was just saying, with that change, the ending fund balance as a percent, the forecasted ending fund balance as a percentage of expenditures is, with this package, is 27.3%, which is the same number it was in the proposed budget.
Thank you. Are there any proposed further modifications to the budget? Going once, propose further modifications to the budget. Going twice. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have a budget. Well, we haven't voted on it, but sorry, I'd be dramatic. But we're done for now. So the part of City Administrator Bobkowitz is now being played by Deputy City Administrator Snyder. Closing comments, Deputy City Administrator?
I just wanted to express our appreciation. Thank you to council for going through many council meetings and a few later evenings and discussing the budget and getting through these deliberations. Thank you. I also wanted to thank the members of the senior leadership team and other city staff who have also been here with us for every step of the process and have done some quick turnarounds on answering council questions and getting us here. And of course, most especially, thank you to the budget team, specifically Director Beth Goldberg and Budget Analyst Susie Monsell. So thank you very much.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.